Chapter 1. Arbor hid behind a tree and looked at Wu Yinjin, who was holding her stomach as she ran out from behind the slope. Her face was green from diarrhea, and he smiled. He had put something good in this Annie's cup just now, and it seemed like it was just starting to take effect. Arbor was like a nimble cat as he quietly scurried behind Wu Yinjin. He pursed his lips and tilted his head. He used the moderately sized hard rock in his hand and smashed it at the back of Wu Yinjin's head without any explanation. He smashed it 3 times in a row. Blood immediately flowed down from the back of her head. Wu Yinjin's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't even say a word before she fell to the ground with a thud. The place she fell happened to be a slope, so Arbor didn't have to do anything. She slid down by herself and rolled to the side of a man-made channel that was half dug. Half of her face was immersed in the dirty mud, and she didn't move at all. Arbor slowly followed down the slope. He came to Wu Yinjin's side and squatted down. He grabbed her hair with both hands and suddenly pressed it down, pressing it firmly into the mud. He still remembered that in his previous life, when this woman took his sister Jolin away from their family, she spoke highly of the rich family that adopted her, saying that they were kind and virtuous, as if they were living immortals that came down from the heavens to save the poor. But in the end, when they met again, Jolin was lying in the cold rain, her clothes barely covering her body. She had been abused from head to toe, and there wasn't a piece of good flesh on her body. She was thrown into the wilderness like a pile of trash, and wild dogs were gnawing on her ragged, doll-like corpse. Little Lin was only 12 at that time. 12 years old, such a young life should have been very lively, but it turned into a cold corpse. It was this woman, this human trafficker who deserved to go to the 18th level of hell, who went against her conscience to earn money and pushed her sister into hell. At the same time, she also harmed countless children from poor families in the village. At this moment, the woman under Arbor's hand woke up in a daze, probably because her breathing was so rapid that she was almost suffocating. She subconsciously struggled. Arbor's dark eyes flashed with a cold light. Without thinking, he increased the strength of his hand and pressed the woman's head down into the water. The sudden pressure caused Wu Yinjin's entire face to be deeply buried in the mud. The sticky feeling poured into her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, making her want to scream in fear. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, several large mouthfuls of muddy water were poured into her mouth, causing her breathing to become more rapid and her head to swell painfully. Arbor's eyes were cold as he stared expressionlessly at the woman who was on the verge of death. In the 3 days since his rebirth, Arbor had been carefully pondering over the experiences of his previous life. It could be said that the appearance of this Wu Yinjin was the fuse that led to the tragic fate of himself and his family in his previous life. Whether it was her mother's depression and death, her father's forced marriage, her stepmother's deliberate indulgence, her younger brother's rebellious hedonism, or her and her younger sister's miserable ending, they were all related to this woman who was struggling bitterly in the mud in front of her. Therefore, he told himself in his heart that this two-faced and extremely vicious Wu Yinjin deserved to die. If you don't die, how can you change my future? If you don't die, how can you reverse the fate of my family? So, you'd better listen to me obediently. Just like this, obediently and straightforwardly, go. Die. Go. Why do I feel like I'm being targeted? Arbor subconsciously shrunk his shoulders. Chapter 2. Arbor felt a chill on his back, as if he was being stared at by a ferocious beast. Arbor's body tensed up, and he raised his head abruptly. His gaze turned slightly, and a wisp of cold, murderous intent leaped in his dark pupils. Unexpectedly, he bumped into a pair of calm, solemn, and leisurely ink-colored phoenix eyes. Xiao Mu's heart instantly sank with a thump. This was the first time he committed a crime after his rebirth, and he was caught on the spot just like that? Arbor was a little speechless, but he was not frightened. A pair of pitch-black eyes stared at the other side quietly and motionlessly. Across the half-abandoned artificial channel, the two pairs of eyes met and stared at each other. On this side of the channel, there was a barren muddy road, and there was a shallow pit with every step. On the other side, under the feet of the young man, there was a thick layer of yellow soil, and a place filled with smoke and sand from the horse's hooves. He was about 13 or 14 years old, the age when he was dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse. He wore a thin, spring white robe, spacious and not tied at the waist. His black hair hung down like a waterfall, fluttering along with his clothes. The young man's sleeves were lightly rolled up to his elbows, revealing his slightly bronzed skin under the scorching sun. When Xiaomu looked over, she only saw a light breeze gently caressing his slightly disheveled forehead hair. His phoenix eyes, which were as resplendent and deep as pitch-black gemstones, radiated a serene and dazzling luster like a deep pool as he glanced around. But he did not know how long he had been riding the horse there. His face was extremely handsome, like the scorching sun, shining with vigor and high spirits. Behind him, there was a young man in black with a short lapel following him. Under the thick yellow sand, in the billowing smoke and dust, the handsome and slender young man in white, untainted by the wind and sand, naturally formed a scenery that could not be ignored. It was as long as he stood there, everything in the world, in an instant, seemed to lose many colors, completely becoming a background that decorated his excellence and beauty. What was under his feet was just a piece of wasteland in the village, but in the eyes of others, it was as if he was standing in the main hall of the 3 states and 6 prefectures, overlooking the world, exuding an incomparable noble aura. Xiaomu could tell that this youth's seemingly tranquil eyes concealed a sharpness that almost made people unable to look straight at him. It instantly made people associate him with the sharp and cunning leopards of the grasslands, who could pounce forward and ferociously bite your throat if you were caught off guard, causing people to feel an uncontrollable danger. Of course, if you looked at people's appearance, you would completely lose. After living 2 lives, if Xiaomu still could not grasp this principle of being a human, then she really had lived in vain. Xiaomu followed her animal instincts and intuitively sensed a dangerous scent from the unknown youth in front of her. She immediately retracted her hands and released Wu Yinzhen from her death grip. She expressionlessly looked at the other side again. Then, he stretched out his hand and slowly straightened his clothes, smoothed his slightly messy hair, turned around, put his hands in his pockets, and slowly left. Behind the young man in white, there were more than 10 young men of the same age in black. After a long time, they tried to find their breathing again. One of them urged his horse forward and looked at Arbor's disappearing figure with a startled expression. "Master, that little girl just now, was she killing people?" This question was obviously nonsense. Didn't people with discerning eyes see it just now? The young man in white turned his head, and a trace of a sneer appeared on his incomparably beautiful face under the spring moon. The young man in black with a straight posture and eyes as sharp as an eagle's raised his hand and touched his nose with an embarrassed expression. This subordinate was just saying. That little girl grabbed a hard rock and smashed the back of the fat woman's head. Then, when the fat woman rolled down the slope, she indifferently pressed her into the mud and tried to suffocate her. The whole set of killing actions was very skillful. Her expression was also abnormally calm, so calm that it was almost creepy. Although in the end, she did not succeed because she found out that they were present, but looking at her age, she was at most 5 or 6 years old. She could be so ruthless. That's right, her movements, the power she controlled, seemed to be a little strange. Most importantly, later on, when she found out that they had witnessed the whole process of her killing, she could still act as if nothing had happened. She just straightened her clothes and calmly walked away. What kind of rotten child was this? Was she not a demon? She was expressionless the whole time. Her personality was so calm that it was numb. Another young man in black came forward and said, "It must be because they opened their eyes in the wrong way. That's why they saw a 5 or 6-year-old murderer in this ordinary little mountain village." Chapter 3. At the Quoto village market, on a small patch of bare dirt, under the dusk, the 100 families of the village gathered here. They stood in a deathly stillness for nearly an hour, their bodies and faces covered with dust and sand from the wind. The crowd didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They all held their breaths and suppressed some fear in their eyes as they looked at a green-robed man who was walking a hyena that was as tall as a man. The man leisurely smiled as he slowly walked in front of the crowd. The hyena's nose kept sniffing around the crowd's legs, shocking everyone to the point that they froze on the spot and didn't dare to move at all. Suddenly, the hyena bared its sharp teeth and let out a low whimper before abruptly pouncing toward a figure in the crowd. The ferocious speed and explosive force caused the crowd to let out terrified screams and instinctively spread out to the left and right. Immediately, a middle-aged man was trampled to the ground by the hyena's 4 thick hooves. With a boom, his back hit the ground, causing dust to scatter everywhere. The crowd around the middle-aged man retreated like a receding tide. Every single one of them had a trace of bewilderment, uneasiness, and fear in their eyes. Crack! A whip fiercely landed on the middle-aged man's body. Everyone clearly saw the middle-aged man's body curl up slightly, and his limbs twitched fiercely. Lowly, unruly commoner. The green-robed man who had released the hyena to bite the person stood in front of the crowd with his arms crossed. He looked at the person under the hyena's foot with disdain and curled his cold lips. He mocked. As everyone knows, the magnetite mine belongs to Tiandao sect. Anyone who privately mines it in any form is illegally occupying it, committing the unforgivable crime of theft. Tell me, how do you want to die? Liuzi, a woman with messy hair and an 11 or 12-year-old girl rushed out from the crowd. The two of them scrambled forward, but they were whipped several times by the green-robed man. They screamed in fear and retreated with a panicked expression on their faces. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Xiao Lu shouted in fear when he saw his wife and daughter rushing out. The hyena straightened its body. It was at least 8 meters tall, and it suddenly pounced in front of the girl. It bit the hem of her skirt and tore at it. The girl was so shocked that she fell backward. Her legs went soft, and she sat on the ground. She supported herself on the ground with both hands and screamed in fear. On the other side, Arbor was standing in the crowd with his father, Xiao Zhongbong, in his arms. His face was filled with displeasure. After all, her mental age was already so old. How could she like being hugged by her father? Moreover, she was still suppressing a trace of anger and dissatisfaction towards this father of hers. Wei Ziqin looked at Xiao Lu's family of 3 worriedly. She lowered her head and looked at her 3-year-old daughter, Xiao Lin, who was hugging her calf and hiding behind her. She patted her daughter's head and comforted her softly. Don't be afraid, child. It'll be fine. This was only his mother's feeble consolation. How could he be fine? In the center of the crowd, the hyena, which was as tall as a person, chased after the panic-stricken Xiao Lu's daughter. It tore at her skirt like it was playing with a toy. Although the onlookers were angry, they did not dare to say anything. Meanwhile, the green-robed man who allowed the hyena to bully the girl stood to the side with a chuckle. He looked at this good show with a mocking gaze. The girl's clothes and skirt were torn off piece by piece, falling down like snowflakes. The tattered clothes could cover less and less skin. The village chief of Quoto village stood there with his walking stick. His face was filled with anger as he looked up at the luxuriously dressed patrolling officials beside him. However, the officials turned a blind eye to the bullying of Xiao Lu's daughter. They stood beside a young noble and fawned over him with flattering smiles. However, the young noble did not have a good expression. He even ignored the officials who were nodding and bowing. His gaze followed the green-robed man uneasily, and a thin layer of sweat seeped out of his forehead. Tell me, where is the magnetite mine that you privately mined? The green-robed man grabbed the hyena's leash and stepped on Xiao Lu's chest. He used so much strength that Xiao Lu's face flushed red. His chest was so stifled that he could not speak. Chapter 4. Sirs, please forgive us. How could we dare to privately mine the magnetite mine? Our family has lived in Quoto village for generations, and we're all dutiful and good citizens. Xiao Lu's aunt crawled to the green-robed man's side and begged for mercy with tears and snot streaming down her face. She reached out to tug at his sleeve, but the latter kicked her to the ground with a look of disdain. Lies. You have the smell of magnetite on you, so you can't fool my hyenas, that person shouted angrily. 2 other Heavenly Tao sect disciples wearing the same style of green robes quickly walked forward. One of them picked up the 11 or 12-year-old girl from the ground, leaving the girl's torn clothes to fall to the ground. The girl struggled, but she was smashed to the ground by a heavy slap and couldn't get up for a long time. Xiao Lu's aunt screamed and abandoned her husband, crying as she crawled toward the girl. She shakily took off her coat and draped it over the girl's shoulders, repeatedly calling out, "Xiaoya, Xiaoya, mother, mother." Xiaoya tightly clutched her mother's coat, her knuckles turning white. Her small face was filled with confusion and dizziness. 4 or 5 cold glinting swords were pointed at the chests of Xiao Lu's family of 3. "I'll ask you one more time. Where is the magnetite mine? Tell us the truth, and we'll leave your corpses intact. Otherwise, don't blame Heavenly Dao sect for being ruthless." Suddenly, the sound of a dozen or so horses galloping came from the distance, stirring up clouds of dust and choking everyone to the side, quickly opening up a wide path for the group of horses to pass through. Arbor took advantage of the chaos to struggle, quickly breaking free from his father's embrace. He nimbly jumped to the ground and ran toward Xiao Lu's family of 3. "Jojo!" Mother Wei Ziqin cried out in alarm. The sound of the horses' hooves stopped, and the group of black-robed youths nimbly dismounted. They led the horses to the side, opening up a wide path. The curtain of night fell slightly, and the sun set below the western mountains. A young man in a spotless white robe with his black hair fluttering in the wind urged his horse forward slowly. There was a smile on his lips, like a spring breeze. Everywhere he passed, everyone stared at him, unable to move their gazes away. While everyone's gazes were glued to his body, only his gaze landed on the expressionless little girl. The arc on his lips gradually deepened, and even the depths of his eyes were tinged with a hint of a smile. The summer night breeze blew gently, and the air was filled with an unpredictable feeling of stuffiness. Everyone kept their mouths shut and their eyes fixed on the beautiful young man in white who rode his horse forward. Arbor coldly glanced at them, then calmly retracted his gaze. His little hand impolitely stretched out and heavily pushed away the hands that were holding the swords. His little arm pointed backwards, and his cold eyes did not contain any warmth as he stared fixedly at the green-robed man in the lead. The green-robed men glared at him. "What are you doing? How dare you? Audacious! Audacious! How can you make a racket in front of His Highness?" Several pot-bellied officials trembled as they ran forward and hurriedly knelt down to salute. "This humble official greets His Highness Crown Prince Lien." This humble official did not know His Highness Crown Prince Lien had arrived, so this humble official did not welcome you. "Please forgive us, Your Highness." As the officials spoke, they did not forget to wave their hands to have the people around them kneel down. "Kneel down. All of you kneel down. A group of fools. They have no sense of propriety. How dare they look directly at His Highness the Crown Prince's sacred face? How audacious!" All the villagers, who seemed to have their acupoints pressed, knelt down in fear and trepidation. They lowered their heads and kowtowed, not daring to look up. The green-robed men from the Tiandao sect, who were leading hyenas, did not dare to make a ruckus. Although they did not bow like the villagers, they still knelt on one knee, one hand across their chest, and respectfully called out in unison, "Disciples of the Tiandao sect greet His Highness Crown Prince Lien." Chapter 5. Lien wasn't willing to look at the others at all. His gaze had been on the little girl with the wooden and indifferent eyes from beginning to end. Dismounting from the horse, he quickly walked a few steps closer to Arbor. Lien followed the little girl's arm and looked up. It was a mountain covered in weeds and withered trees. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited for many years. From afar, it was a deathly still expanse of withered, yellow, and gray. But the little girl's arm had been swinging until now without saying a word. She only coldly pointed at the mountain, her gaze cold as she looked at the azure-robed man leading the Tiandao sect group. Lien didn't like that pair of beautiful, clear, and cold eyes staring blankly at other people. His brows furrowed slightly. He suddenly turned around and fiercely glared at the azure-robed man. The latter was stared at to the point his hair stood on end, and he couldn't help but take a step back to avoid this terrifying gaze. Lien suddenly broke into a smile like the spring wind and rain, as if that sharp and icy glance from before was just an illusory glance. He turned to look at the silent arbor and seemed to instantly understand the little fellow's gesture. He softly asked, "Magnetite mine? On that mountain?" As soon as he said this, the gazes of the azure-robed men from the Tiandao sect all changed. The young nobleman who was being flattered and fawned over by the officials trembled slightly. Cold sweat once again seeped out of his forehead. It was as if Lien had only noticed that noble young sir who was sweating profusely at this moment, and his handsome face was tinged with a hint of a smile. He turned around and nodded at that person. "So my dear third royal brother is also here." The young nobleman Tung drew back the corners of his mouth. He seemed to want to pull out a friendly smile, but that smile seemed to have been carved out by a knife. He only managed to draw a stiff arc. Lien was just casually greeting him. When she saw the stiff and unnatural expression on her dear third brother's face, the smile in her eyes deepened. She walked towards Arbor and naturally held her little hand. "Let's go. Take us there." Xiaomu retreated a step with wariness in her eyes, avoiding Lien's finger. She then stretched her small arm across old Sixth Qiao and his family of 3. "You'll only bring us over if you release them?" Lien really wanted to praise herself for being so quick-witted. Although the little girl didn't say anything, she always understood what she meant. "How dare you? You dare to negotiate with our Tiandao sect? Let them go," Lien said indifferently, causing the disciples of the Tiandao sect to choke. "Your Highness." The Heavenly Dao sect disciples were dissatisfied. The Heavenly Dao sect had a transcendent status in the entire Seikong planet. These disciples had always been revered and flattered by others. The Crown Prince's tone was a bit too much. This Crown Prince said, "Let them go." Crown Prince Lien's voice was neither loud nor soft, and his tone wasn't even strict. He repeated his words. As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen youths in black behind him unsheathed their swords at the same time and gathered murderous intent in their eyes. The disciples of the Tiandao sect looked at Lien angrily but didn't dare to say anything. They opened their mouths but didn't dare to refute. They knew very well that if they dared to refute, the outcome would be death. Those familiar with Crown Prince Lien generally knew that the Crown Prince, who was as calm and tranquil as a banished immortal, was only elegant and refined on the surface. In reality, this Crown Prince was full of schemes and was used to acting arbitrarily. Even the 2 deputy sect masters of the Tiandao sect were extremely courteous to Crown Prince Lien and didn't dare to casually offend him. Once Crown Prince Lien was enraged, those who offended him would most likely be annihilated and die. What Crown Prince Lien disliked the most was repeating the same sentence over and over again. Generally, what he said was equivalent to the final decision, so those close to him wouldn't foolishly repeat the same question. Murderous intent had already condensed in his nonchalant tone. The disciples of the Tiandao sect could only hold their anger and step back. They waved their hands and let old Xiao and his family go. Chapter 6. Jojo. Wei Ziqin covered her mouth as she gazed at her eldest daughter, who had been left alone. She couldn't hide the worry and fear in her eyes. "You can lead the way now, right?" Crown Prince Lien looked at the little girl with a smile. From the moment he met her by the canal until now, the little girl's face had always been expressionless. That apathetic and cold face really wasn't cute. Just like now. That pair of eyes that were clearly filled with autumn ripples and sweet and soft now sparkled with the luster of a clear and cold moon. The depths of her eyes were cold and solemn, without the slightest ripple of emotion. Her small face was expressionless, and there was no reflection of anyone in her eyes. There was only coldness, and only indifference and disregard alternated. Chaotic mountain arbor, green moss, and fragrant sunshine. That day, that person, as time passed, slowly entered her eyes, her heart, and her bones. Many years later, when she recalled it from the beginning, Lien couldn't help but sigh. This was destined to be bewitched, a fate that she couldn't break free from. Even if she were to choose again, the ending would probably not change. Crown Prince Lien reflexively reached out, but Arbor dodged in a flash. Arbor cast a glance at his parents from afar and nodded slightly to show his reassurance. He turned and walked toward the back of the mountain. Hullen Mountain surrounded the entire Quoto village in the center and was extremely large. Arbor moved very quickly. He found a path at the foot of the mountain and climbed up the mountain with all his might. Emolian and the group of black-clothed youths followed closely behind, followed by the several Heavenly Tao sect disciples who were leashing hyenas and their attendants. Third Prince Immerse gritted his teeth and followed at the back, sweating profusely. A cold light flashed in his eyes as he stared intently at Arbor's figure. As the mountain path narrowed and the path became more difficult to walk on, Immerse's expression also became more and more unsightly. It was inconceivable and frightening. Immerse's eyes shone with an evil light as countless thoughts churned in his mind. Who exactly was this little girl? How did she know about this secret path? This Hullen Mountain had been deserted for many years. Why did the little girl feel like she was walking in her own home when she walked in this mountain? It was so familiar that it made people feel a chill run down their backs. This section of the mountain road was very steep. There were no man-made mountain paths at all. Walking on the muddy mountain road was like climbing. There were withered branches everywhere. If one was not careful, one's clothes would be pierced by the sharp branches. After climbing for about an hour, Arbor stopped in front of a hidden cave. For an ordinary child, this was simply an arduous journey that was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Even the Heavenly Tao sect's disciples were panicking. Their faces were pale and their clothes were torn. However, this little fellow's expression didn't change at all. The Tiandao sect disciples looked at each other in surprise. Arbor, however, stood still and stared at the cave with emotionless eyes. She remembered that in her previous life, around this time, the Emo Kingdom's third prince Immerse had privately mined a magnetite mine and caused a huge commotion. The Tiandao sect's disciples also brought people to search the mountain. After spending 5 days and 4 nights, they finally found this hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was hidden very well. It was on the edge of a cliff, and the entrance was filled with withered grass and wood. If it weren't for Arbor pointing it out, a normal person wouldn't have discovered this cave even if they walked around. It was even more impossible for them to run to the edge of the cliff to look around. Chapter 7. Arbor remembered that Xiao Laolu had broken his leg when he went up the mountain and almost lost his life. Not long after he was carried down the mountain, there was a rumor that a mountain ghost had appeared in Hullen Mountain. The mountain ghost came and went mysteriously, lurking during the day and appearing at night. It liked to attack people and eat their hearts and lungs. After the rumor of a ghost had spread, Hullen Mountain, which was originally deserted, became even more despised. Normally, no one would go up the mountain. Now that he thought about it, Xiao Laolu, this unlucky guy, must have unknowingly approached the magnetite mine when he went up the mountain and was secretly attacked by someone who wanted to take his life. However, by chance and coincidence, he managed to escape. Although he came back with his life intact, there was a trace of magnetite smell on his body, which was why he was bitten out by the hyenas, who had a special sense of smell. After half a month, the hyenas were actually able to bite out Xiao Laolu with this faintly discernible smell. It could be considered a skill. As for the rumor that Hullen Mountain was haunted, needless to say, it was definitely the work of that third Prince Mo Tung. He just wanted to scare away the ignorant villagers. The Tiandao sect disciple ordered a dozen or so attendants to enter the cave. After a series of ding-ding-dong-dong-dong sounds, they carried out about 5 or 6 large baskets made of rattan back and forth. They also found more than 20 corpses that were still warm. It seems that these people retreated in a hurry. The newly mined magnetite and these tools were all abandoned. They only had time to silence the miners. The green-robed man from Tiandao sect sneered. He glanced sideways at the gorgeously dressed youth and suddenly said with a smile, "What does Third Prince Ting think about this matter?" The noble-looking youth's forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Hearing this, he hurriedly cupped his hands and said with an apologetic smile, "Senior Marshal Brother G must be joking. Since we found out that someone violated the rules and secretly mined the magnetite mine, we naturally have to deal with this matter seriously. We have to ferret out the daring person as soon as possible and deal with him later." The green-robed man from Tiandao sect looked deeply at Third Prince Imo Teng with a smile and nodded, saying, "Third Prince is right. Tiandao sect won't wrongly accuse anyone and naturally won't let go of anyone who dares to challenge Tiandao sect's dignity. The noble-looking young man was sweating profusely. His lips twitched stiffly, revealing a smile that was uglier than crying. Every one of the Heavenly Dao sect's attendants who were moving back and forth in the cave had a joyous expression on their faces. In such a joyous atmosphere, the little girl's wooden face appeared especially cold and indifferent. "You're Jojo." His phoenix eyes rippled with moist light, and a naturally handsome face suddenly appeared in front of her. Arbor, who was hugging his knees and sitting on a mound, subconsciously tilted his head back. A trace of displeasure flashed through his eyes. He turned his head and saw the young man's spotless white clothes piled up like snow at his feet. He supported his chin with one hand, and his dark hair fell gently on the side of his cheek. His thin lips were slightly curved as he looked at her with a smile. The wind brushed past his face, and his phoenix eyes glowed with a glass-like luster. In that instant, all the colors in the boundless world seemed to be taken away by him. Apart from him, everything else paled in comparison. Arbor unwillingly moved to the side, very consciously distancing himself from this dangerous person just a little bit more. Crown Prince Lien's alluring phoenix eyes suddenly widened. He stared incredulously at the little Arbor, who kept distancing himself from him. How was this possible? Was he that shameless? What was the meaning of this little girl's disdainful and distant gaze? Was he that bad? The moment Crown Prince Lien received a blow, Arbor had already stood up and ran to that senior brother Ji from Tiandao sect. He stretched out his small arm in front of him and very impolitely waved his small hand. Chapter 8. Everyone from Tiandao sect stared at her with their mouths agape. They had probably never seen a child who was so straightforward in asking for money and was even unwilling to talk to them. Their eyes were filled with shock. Seeing that senior brother Ji from the Tiandao sect didn't react and just stood there in a daze, Arbor first looked at him with disdain. Then, she poked her hand in front of him again and weighed him heavily a few more times. Crown Prince Lien really laughed, his eyebrows curving into crescents. The Tiandao sect elders dumbfoundedly put down the magnetite in their hands and stared blankly at the child who led the way. The child's expression had changed from disdain to extreme disdain. Her eyes were filled with anger, and her almond-shaped eyes were round as she glared at senior brother Ji from the Tiandao sect as if she was looking at an absolutely irreconcilable enemy. "You bunch of country bumpkins. Don't tell me you don't have money?" The great Tiandao sect can't even fork out a trifling guide fee. Crown Prince Lien once again understood the child's gaze and kindly translated for her. Senior brother Ji's mouth twitched. He stiffly reached into his clothes and took out a small silver pouch, throwing it into Arbor's open hand. "Take it." The child unceremoniously opened the silver pouch in front of him and flipped through it. There were more than 10 taels of silver in the pouch. In this small mountain village, this could be considered a considerable amount of wealth. However, the child didn't seem to be satisfied with this small silver pouch. With a flip of his hand, he smashed the silver pouch onto senior brother Ji's face. The disdain and contempt that overflowed from his eyes almost flowed out of his wooden face. The way she looked at the people from the Tiandao sect really made them anxious. Crown Prince Lien laughed again and translated, "Are you trying to dismiss a beggar? Too little." This time, the dozen youths in black behind Crown Prince Lien couldn't hold back their laughter. Arbor abruptly turned her head and coldly stared at Imo Lien with her dark eyes that were as deep as a dry well. Then, she turned her head to look at senior brother Ji again. She took a step forward and raised her hand high. Her slender fingers once again poked senior brother Ji's body. Although that crown prince looked annoying, he was the smartest person in this group and could understand her meaning. Senior martial brother Ji couldn't tell whether he was amused or angry. He flipped his hand and took out 2 more bags embroidered with gold thread from his bosom, stuffing them both into the little fellow's hands. Arbor flipped through the bags and saw that there were 50 taels of gold in each bag. Putting the bag away, Arbor turned around and walked down the mountain without looking back. "Jojo," Imo Lien chuckled as he watched the little fellow briskly leave after taking the money. His footsteps drifted as he caught up with her small figure. You really are heartless. You see, I helped you commentate a game and gave you a generous reward. Shouldn't we become good friends? What he got in response was the child turning her head back to glare icily at him. Afterwards, the little fellow took to her heels and sprinted down the mountain. Her instantaneous burst of speed stunned even Emolien. Hee, you're shy? Emolien chuckled. Her figure flashed and swept through the forest like a wisp of smoke, chasing after the little fellow. The group of black-clothed followers behind the young crown prince were all dumbstruck. What was going on? His Highness the Crown Prince actually chased after such a ferocious little girl? Your Highness, where's your cold and noble demeanor? Chapter 9. The crowd in the plaza hadn't dispersed yet. The people of Tiandao sect hadn't told them to disperse, so naturally, no one dared to leave. At this time, the sky was already drizzling down on everyone's heavy hearts. Everyone stood in the plaza with their families, and the sound of their breathing slowed down. When Arbor's slender figure ran down from the mountain, everyone's eyes immediately fell on her. Jojo, Xiao Zhongbong, and Wei Ziqin were full of joy. Just as they were about to go forward, they suddenly heard several villagers cry out in alarm, "Careful!" Arbor only saw a huge shadow flash in front of her eyes, and something heavily pressed down from above her head. At this critical moment, Arbor rolled on the ground and quickly escaped from under the huge thing. However, the back of her left hand was still scratched by that thing, and a sharp pain instantly assaulted her. Arbor's right hand supported her body on the ground, and her body was half squatting. She looked down indifferently at the 3 bloody marks on the back of her left hand. She slightly raised her injured hand, revealing a section of her tongue, and lightly licked the drops of blood that slid down the back of her hand. The tip of her tongue was filled with a salty, wet, and fishy taste. In other people's eyes, Xiao Mu's unruffled, joyful, and contented appearance was frightening. It was as if she wasn't licking her own blood, but leftover food. Her cold gaze fell on the 3 feet in front of her, and her eyes were calm without the slightest trace of human life. The atmosphere in the plaza became even more oppressive. Everyone huddled together, constantly suppressing their breathing, and nervously watching the 2 young girls, one tall and one short, on the plaza. Compared to the short and petite Xiao Mu, who was dressed in a dusty cotton robe, the girl in front of her was about 12 years old. She was adorned with pearls and jade, and she wore a camellia yellow flower pattern dress, which made her delicate and pretty appearance even more gorgeous. The girl was leading a huge hyena and was sizing up Arbor from the corner of her eyes. When she saw the other party's disdainful and indifferent glance, she suddenly became angry. It's just as the disciple said. You stinky girl, you're very arrogant. Xiao Mu's soft and warm tongue carefully licked the blood on the back of her hand, and there was also a faint red stain on the corner of her lips. Emolien, who had followed her down the mountain, caught sight of the little girl's expressionless action with a glance, and his gaze instantly paused. What a wooden baby! Eat her! The 12-year-old girl suddenly let go of the hyena's leash, raised her chin arrogantly, and looked at Arbor as if she was looking at a dead man. The giant hyena stomped its 2 hind legs and bared its teeth as it whimpered. Sticky liquid dripped from its mouth as it assumed an attacking posture. Stop! Emolien coldly rebuked and threw a fierce glare at the hyena. As if it felt a great threat, the hyena subconsciously shrank back. The girl turned her head, and her eyes instantly shone brightly. She dashed toward Emolien like a butterfly through flowers. Brother Lien. With a flick of his sleeve, Emolien sidestepped to avoid contact with her. A severe glint suddenly flashed in his eyes, and a slender, jet-black sword appeared in his hand, almost slicing off the girl's 5 fingers. Fortunately, the girl retracted her hand quickly. The moment she saw Emolien's fierce expression, she immediately remembered the rumors that Crown Prince Lien was a clean freak who didn't like people close to him. The moment she retracted her hand, the long nail on her middle finger was cleanly cut off. If she had been a second later, her fingers would have been gone. The girl trembled all over as if her bones had been pulled out. Her whole body went limp, and she fell to the ground. Her bright eyes were filled with pitiful tears. She bit her lip and looked at the high and mighty crown prince, who seemed like an unapproachable god. There was a faint smile in his eyes, and his appearance was as gentle as the spring breeze caressing the moon. However, his merciless attack was so fast that it made people despair. If it weren't for the suffocating coldness of the sword, she might have drowned in that faint smile and gentle gaze. At this time, the crowd gasped in unison again. The hyena that was stopped by Crown Prince Lian's shout did not move again, but the person who moved was our dear Xiaomu. When Crown Prince Lian attacked the girl, Xiaomu hastily rolled forward and reached the giant hyena's belly in a few steps. Chapter 10. Before the crowd could finish gasping, they saw the little figure suddenly pull out the dagger tied to her calf. Her movements were nimble and swift as she drew 6 long bloody lines on the hyena's abdomen. It wasn't until the hyena's painful howls that the crowd's expression changed from dumbfounded to extreme shock. They all felt that they couldn't immediately adapt to the situation. The hyena's skin was thick and its body was huge. How could Xiao Qiao's little dagger cut open the big guy's abdomen in an instant? In this world, although hyenas were not as strong as mystical beasts and were only ordinary wild beasts in the forest, they were huge in size, astonishingly fast, and powerful in attack. Ordinary people would not dare to provoke them, but why did it look like they were killed so easily in the hands of this little girl? Looking at the hyena that was rolling back and forth on the ground with its internal organs and blood dripping down, most people could not help but turn around and vomit as well. They felt that this scarlet visual conflict was too shocking. The little girl stood beside the giant hyena that was slowly curling up into a ball and gradually dying. A few drops of the hyena's blood sprayed on her wooden little face, staining the corner of her eyebrows and the left side of her face, adding a bit of scarlet coldness to her. The 12-year-old girl hadn't yet recovered from the shock of the cold-blooded and terrifying Crown Prince Lian wanting to kill her. When she saw the scene in front of her, she lost control of her emotions for a moment. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed, "Ah, monster!" The damned girl in front of her was a monster. How could such a small child act so quickly and decisively, killing a giant hyena in front of everyone? Xiao Mu's figure flitted in front of the girl at an incredible speed, and the instant she spread her fingers, she grabbed the other party's neck and flung her to the ground. She then fiercely tightened her grip, successfully extinguishing the girl's unpleasant screams. There was an extremely strange silence in the assembly hall. Everyone felt that the scene in front of them was particularly strange. Little Arbor's height didn't even reach the girl's shoulder. His arms and legs were as thin as beans, but he had such terrifying strength. He instantly grabbed the girl's throat and grabbed her lifeline. The people of the Tiandao sect were dumbfounded. They were stunned for half a minute before one of the young disciples woke up and shouted, "Stupid girl, you dare to lay your hands on Miss Lu?" A fist smashed towards Arbor's back. Arbor nimbly turned around and quickly blocked Miss Lu's fist. Seeing that the huge fist was about to hit Miss Lu's pale face, the disciple was so scared that he hurriedly pulled back his fist. However, because he couldn't control his strength freely, he was injured by the backlash of his own strength. He staggered back a few steps and sat on the ground. Arbor grabbed Miss Lu's neck and dragged her forward. He raised his leg and kicked the disciple's jaw. The sound of the disciple's jaw shattering was especially shocking in the silent meeting hall. Everyone looked at her with a petrified expression, only to see Arbor kick the back of Miss Lu's knee, making her kneel on the ground. Arbor grabbed the back of Miss Lu's neck with one hand and slammed her head on the ground with all his strength. With a loud bang, Miss Lu was forced to kneel. Her forehead heavily hit the yellow sand, making a muffled sound. It was like a heavy hammer smashing into everyone's heart. Senior Marshal Brother Ji and a group of Tiandao sect disciples came down from the mountain carrying 5 or 6 baskets. When they saw this cruel scene, they instantly howled and rushed towards Arbor. "What are you doing? How dare you be so cruel to Junior Marshal Sister Lu?" Chapter 11. Without waiting for Senior Brother Ji and his group to angrily launch an attack, Xiaomu had already grabbed Miss Lu's messy hair and dragged her to her side like a marionette. In the next second, a snow-white dagger was placed horizontally across Miss Lu's neck, successfully stopping Senior Brother G and his group in their tracks. Their eyes all carried traces of fear and anger. Let Junior Sister Lu go. We can still spare your life. Two Tiandao sect disciples glared at Arbor with murderous intent. Arbor coldly glanced at the two people and ignored them. He pulled the dagger in his hand and cut Miss Lu's snow-white forehead. Ah! Miss Lu seemed to have just recovered from the shock of being beaten. The sharp pain on her forehead and the terrifying feeling of sticky blood dripping down made her tremble uncontrollably. She screamed out in a high-pitched voice. But very quickly, a cold sensation on her neck caused her to completely shut up, leaving only her body trembling uncontrollably. The Tiandao sect disciples were so angry that they raised their fists and were about to charge forward. Unexpectedly, Crown Prince Lian's mocking voice came from the side. I advise you to take a good look before making a move. Senior Brother G also reflexively reached out to block that impulsive disciple. When he heard Crown Prince Lian's words, he couldn't help but be startled and turned to carefully size up Arbor. His gaze actually changed slightly, and it immediately stopped on the little girl's small hand holding the dagger. That small hand looked soft and weak, but a faint white light covered it, making the dagger in her hand lustrous and ghastly white. Mystic energy. Senior Brother G's expression was startled, but it soon turned to joy. He really didn't expect that such a precious mystic cultivator would appear in such an insignificant and shabby village. Looking at the girl's appearance, it seemed like her mystic meridians had just awakened. He didn't know how she muddle-headedly activated her mystic meridians and activated her mystic energy. Although everyone could attempt to activate their mystic meridians at the age of 7, under normal circumstances, they could only do so under the guidance of their seniors and teachers and after using their own mystic energy as a guide. Moreover, it was very rare to succeed in activating mystic meridians on the first try. On the entire Seekong planet, the number of mystic cultivators only accounted for 1 in 10,000 of the total population. In other words, in the entire Seekong planet, ordinary people without mystic veins occupied the vast majority. From this, it could be seen how precious Xian masters were. Every appearance of a mystic cultivator was bound to be a grand event that caused a sensation. It could be seen that the girl's current profound energy aura was still very weak, so much so that her control over it wasn't very good. It was faintly discernible from time to time, but she was able to successfully open her own profound veins without the guidance of a teacher. This kind of talent was worthy of being said to be shocking. At this time, Senior Brother G still hadn't expected that his junior sister Lu, who was a level 2 mystic cultivator, wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow from the savage little girl. She didn't even have the strength to resist. Senior Brother G's expression clearly relaxed. Little girl, you're a mystic cultivator, and so are we. The Heavenly Tao sect had always welcomed all mystic cultivators with the greatest enthusiasm. One had to know that all the Xian masters in the world were kindred spirits. If you have anything to say, we can talk it out. Release Junior Sister Lu first. Arbor flipped his hand, revealing 3 glaring bloodstains on the back of his left hand. His eyes were emotionless as he stared at his opponent coldly. Senior Brother G's outstretched hand suddenly trembled. For some reason, his mind went blank on the spot, and he shouted, "Compensation, compensation. We're willing to compensate." Everyone. Senior Brother G. The Heavenly Tao sect disciples around him all felt their faces flush. Wasn't this Senior Brother G too quick to change sides? This dramatic scene simply left everyone at a loss for what to do. Chapter 12. Senior Martial Brother G swiped through the air and took out a rectangular treasure chest inlaid with a dozen small red gems. He beamed as he handed it over to Arbor. When the treasure chest was opened, the light of pearls and jades inside nearly blinded everyone's eyes. The villagers of Quoto Village had never seen so much jewelry in their lives. The women and girls of Quoto Village usually only used a fishbone hairpin or an ordinary, low-quality wooden hairpin to tie up their hair. Even jade hairpins were rarely seen. So when had they ever used such expensive jewelry? A trace of envy appeared in their eyes, and their gazes gradually became fervent as they looked at the treasure chest. Who wouldn't like jewelry surrounded by pearls and jades? Senior Marshal Brother G was full of confidence, but who would have thought that he would encounter such an oddity? Arbor glanced at the chest and then retracted his gaze, clearly showing his lack of interest. What was even more amazing was that this child even forcefully patted the gold-embroidered pouch that he had stuffed into his chest. Others didn't understand what Arbor meant, but how could Senior Marshal Brother G and some Tiandao sect people not understand? This little fellow clearly said that he wanted gold. He only wanted gold. He didn't like jewelry. He didn't want it. Everyone from Tiandao sect twitched their mouths. Senior Marshal Brother G helplessly put away the treasure chest and handed it to Arbor with a box of small gold ingots. He opened the lid of the chest for her to take a look, and a dazzling golden and orange light once again blinded the villagers of Quoto Village. "Here are 300 taels of gold as compensation for you, little miss," Senior Marshal Brother G said with a chuckle. "That dead hyena was the main culprit who scratched you, little miss. Now, it only has itself to blame for its death. Our Tiandao sect very sincerely compensates you, so please let go of our junior marshal sister Lu first." Arbor glanced over and exerted force in his hand, abruptly pushing Lu Yexin forward without even looking to see if she was about to fall to the ground. Fortunately, Senior Marshal Brother G quickly reached out to support her, and Arbor took the opportunity to take the gold chest. He closed the lid with a bang and turned to leave without looking back. Senior Marshal Brother G, who was used to the little girl taking the money and leaving without saying a word, couldn't help but twitch his eyebrows. He hurriedly said, "Please wait. Little miss, on the 15th day of the 10th month every year, all the sects, schools, and aristocratic families will gather in the imperial capital, Guanlan City, and recruit mystic cultivators from all over the country. If you're interested, you can come to our Heavenly Tao sect on that day and register for the Profound Strength Test. At that time, there will be a specialized teacher to teach you how to accurately use mystic conscious and open the inner world unique to us mystic cultivators." Senior Brother G's eyes curved into crescents as he watched the girl stop in her tracks, anticipating that she would turn around. The surrounding villagers were also envious. They looked at Arbor, who had stopped in his tracks, and thought, "Old Xiao's family is really amazing this time. How great of an honor was it to have a mystic cultivator appear in the family without anyone noticing." Inner world? It was an unusual treasure that normal people didn't even dare to think about. It was said that mystic cultivators who opened their inner world could immediately possess 3 to 5 cubic meters of storage space and could carry many personal items with them, especially those precious treasures that they didn't feel safe leaving outside. Compared to the storage cabinets made by artificers and placed in various cities, the inner world was clearly more convenient, faster, and had more privacy. Thus, tens of thousands of normal people were endlessly envious. Arbor's footsteps only paused for a moment before he returned to his parents' side without looking back. Senior Marshal Brother G was dumbfounded, and a disciple beside him angrily roared, "What's with that attitude? Don't think that you can look down on everyone just because you've become a mystic cultivator. The path of a mystic cultivator is very long. Without the earnest guidance of seniors and teachers, you can't even display 1% of your mystic energy's effectiveness. Senior Marshal Brother G kindly invited you to join our Heavenly Tao sect. Don't be so ignorant and blindly arrogant and conceited." Not interested. Arbor finally turned around and glanced at the Heavenly Tao sect crowd as if he was being charitable. In front of the petrified crowd, his voice was cold, heartless, and terrifyingly clear as he spat out 3 words. Chapter 13. What? That Heavenly Tao sect disciple's chest felt stuffy, and he stammered, almost unable to recover his wits. This girl actually said she wasn't interested? Not interested? She said she wasn't interested? Not only did this dazed Heavenly Tao sect disciple think that he had misheard, but all the surrounding Quoto Village villagers also thought that they were hallucinating. It couldn't be. How could Xiao Mu, this little girl, flatly refused the Heavenly Tao sect's invitation? So you're not a mute. Crown Prince Lien, who suddenly turned in front of Arbor, was so fast that even Arbor's parents felt their vision blur. Before Qiao Zhongbong could react, he found that his daughter had been grabbed by the temperamental Crown Prince Lien, and he retreated a few steps to the side of the crowd. Arbor, who had just returned to her parents' side and hadn't had time to speak with them, was instantly very displeased. She glared at Crown Prince Lien, and her entire body automatically emitted a cold aura that kept people away. However, this lord actually completely ignored her. Not only was he not afraid of being frostbitten by the cold aura, he even openly left the crowd with the child in his arms. The dozen or so black-clothed youths all looked at each other for a long time, and the same question appeared in their eyes at the same time. They had just discovered that the Lord's order to not let unrelated people get close to him seemed to have no effect on this little girl. Sitting on a withered tree trunk as thick as an arm, all she could see was the withered trees of Hullen Mountain. The scene of decline was just like this chaotic world, making one unable to see the slightest bit of hope. However, the world didn't know that under this withered land, there was a paradise with abundant resources hidden in the depths of Hullen Mountain. The baskets of magnetite that they dug out today were nothing. There was a large magnetite mine mountain in the paradise, and it was undulating with countless magnetite. In her previous life, this paradise was excavated when she was 10 years old, and it caused a commotion among various factions. People were greedy, and several major factions fiercely fought over it, resulting in countless casualties. At that time, the zombie disaster had already erupted, and the world was hard for people to survive. This resource-rich mystic realm became the holy land that almost everyone yearned for. Unfortunately, after continuous excavations and looting, as well as the constant destruction of the flames of war, the entire Peach Garden's secret realm was destroyed in less than 3 months. "You're not a mute." The feeling of his fingers pinching her cheeks pulled her thoughts back from a faraway place. Glaring angrily at the smiling, handsome face, Arbor couldn't help but roar in his heart. "You're the mute? Your whole family is mute." "My whole family isn't mute." Crown Prince Lien instantly understood the little girl's gaze. His sudden remark made Arbor roll his eyes. The young man smiled and didn't get angry. He just pulled Arbor's small hand, opened her curled palm, and turned it over. His gaze fell on the 3 red marks. Arbor tried to pull his hand back but failed. He glared angrily but did not say anything. He was unhappy. "All right, stop messing around. I'm helping you bandage your wounds. If the wound isn't treated properly, your hand will become ugly." The young man reached out and grabbed a cup of clean water out of thin air. He carefully washed Arbor's left hand and wiped it clean with a white handkerchief. A bottle of ointment concocted with a secret recipe appeared out of thin air in her hand. When she opened the lid, a faint fragrance assailed her nostrils. Xiao Mu's emotionless eyes suddenly twitched, and her beady black eyeballs rolled. "You like it? I'll give it to you when I'm done." The young man was applying the ointment for Arbor. His hands didn't stop moving, and he didn't even raise his head as he spoke with a smile. Chapter 14. Xiao Mu did not refuse when she heard this. It was already the middle of the 6th lunar month. If the pattern from her previous life did not reverse and the timing matched, then a terrifying calamity would erupt on the first day of the 7th lunar month 15 days later, the calamity of zombies. At that time, surviving in this chaotic world would be even more difficult than it was now. Medicine was something that everyone would use. When this ointment was applied, the wound would no longer feel pain. It had an excellent hemostatic effect, and the color of the wound would immediately lighten. There was a heaven and earth difference between the efficacy of this ointment and the low-grade medicine circulating in the world. It must be an excellent medicine. Since someone was so generous as to give it to her, she would accept it. "All right, the wound will basically scab over at night. After you wake up, your hand will be as good as new." The youth held her thin wrist and gently blew on it. "It doesn't hurt anymore." Arbor couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. Did he think he was an apothecary? Blowing on air. She did know that after the zombie outbreak in her previous life, a group of people with special abilities appeared in addition to mystic cultivators, including apothecaries with medicinal properties all over their bodies. A high-level apothecary could indeed heal a person's wound with just a few breaths, but the prerequisite was that you were an apothecary, and you had to be a high-level apothecary or above. Your every breath carried medicinal properties, and you could heal a group of people by just casually blowing a few breaths containing medicinal properties. But youth, you're not an apothecary. Arbor tried to pull her hand back but couldn't, so she glared at him angrily. That's enough. I've already applied medicine and bandaged your wound. Why aren't you letting go? Crown Prince Lien ignored the little girl's glare and even pinched her puffy cheeks. Why aren't you talking? I'm not in the mood. You have to talk even if you're not in the mood. People need to communicate with each other to understand each other. Who the hell wants to understand you? A certain child glared at him with her round eyes, almost wanting to curse. Lien burst into laughter and poked her fleshy cheeks. We're friends. Friends? Arbor's pitch-black eyes gradually cooled, as if a basin of ice water had been poured over those beautiful eyes, chilling them to the bone. I don't need it. She didn't need things like friends. Friends? What are friends? Friends were meant to be sold. It was just that the price was high and the price was low. The friend she had trusted had sent her into an experimental cage, broke her limbs, and made her crawl in the dark forever. He used some strange little hammers and nails to hit her body, looking for clues to expand her inner world. In the past, she naively believed that there was such a thing as true love in this world. And then, other than her mother, who had passed away early due to depression, it seemed that no one had ever given her such a luxurious gift. Later on, she didn't need it anymore. She didn't need anything. Now, I don't need such a tacky thing. Friends? True feelings? She didn't have it, and she didn't need anyone to give it to her, because it was nice to be alone. It was clearly a pair of watery, round, and beautiful eyes, but they contained such a cold light. This was really too incongruous. Jojo, we will be friends. The young man tilted his head slightly, with a hint of interest and expectation in his eyes. Look, even if you don't open your mouth to speak, I can instantly understand your thoughts. What does this mean? This is the so-called fate, isn't it? Arbor's eyes flashed with vigilance. She snatched the ointment from the young man's hand and jumped down from the tree. Chapter 15. As Xiaomu fled, the youth's lustrous phoenix eyes filled with interest and anticipation flashed past her eyes from time to time. This kind of interested gaze was like looking at a little pet. It reminded her of her previous life, the man who doted on her like she was a kitten or a puppy. He treated her like a small animal and locked her up in an iron cage. He fed her 5 or 6 meals a day and served her well. Every time there was a festival or when he attended a banquet, he would dress her up beautifully and carry her out for others to see. She would receive the praise of others against her will. Every time he heard others praise her beauty and uniqueness, the man's eyes would curve into crescents and emit a gentle light. That pair of dark green eyes that were as deep as emerald seemed to have magical powers that could suck a person's soul bit by bit into a boundless emerald vortex. He would look at you with a smile like that, making you unable to reject him. She had had enough of those terrifying days. In the depths of her heart, this man who was as powerful and perverted as the devil had become her lifelong nightmare. Every time she thought of her previous life, she would wake up from her nightmares again and again. Then, she told herself, Arbor, you've been reborn. Your life has started all over again. In this life, she must turn everything around and not let herself suffer any more grievances or pain. Don't have any interest in her. Her heart was already a pool of stagnant water that had been sealed in ice for thousands of years. No one could penetrate it. Unless you want to completely understand what it meant to be heartbroken and what it meant to be covered in cuts and bruises, anyone who was interested in her would die in her hands sooner or later. There was no exception. In his cold eyes, a poisonous light shot out like a sharp arrow. When it landed on his mother, who was looking forward to it, it instantly turned into a spring drizzle. It was so docile that there was no longer a trace of bone-chilling coldness. Lien, who was silently following behind Xiaomu, slowly halted his footsteps and creased his brows imperceptibly. A black figure appeared beside him. The short-haired young man looked in Arbor's direction with his eagle-like eyes. His tone was hesitant. Master, what happened? Lien shook her head slightly and retracted the trace of melancholy in her eyes. Without turning her head, she asked, How is emoting now? The third prince was taken away by the Tiandao sect. Tiandao sect has said that if you want to get the third prince back, you must take out 100 mid-grade magnetite in exchange. What a bunch of whimsical lunatics. Emolian laughed mockingly. Is Imoteng worth 100 mid-grade magnetite? It's not worth it, Grandpa. The black-clothed youth also chuckled. Well, it's obviously not worth it. Just now, the people from the Heavenly Dao sect had carried 5 to 6 baskets down the mountain. How many magnetite could the artificers refine from them? Do you have 50 pieces of low-grade magnetite? Not necessarily, Grandpa, the black-clothed youth added. Emolian scoffed. That's why I say they're a bunch of idiots with wild imaginations. The people from the Tiandao sect said that if they can't gather 100 mid-grade magnetite within 3 days, they'll punish His Highness the Third Prince. Tiske, Emolian chuckled and shook her head. If that's the case, then he died a worthy death. Who told my dear older brother to steal magnetite mines out of all the things he could do? Nominally, all the magnetite mines on planet Seekong are mined and collected by the Tiandao sect, and then the resources are uniformly allocated. This rule has been in place for a long time. Although many people have tried to break it, at least they haven't broken it yet, right? However, in private, there were also many countries' higher-ups who secretly found mines to mine. This was something that everyone was well aware of. So many people were privately mining mines. But why didn't the Tiandao sect find anyone else but his older brother, Imoteng? It could only mean that Imoteng, this child, didn't have enough intelligence but still wanted to show off. Now, he could only bear the consequences himself. Chapter 16. If that's the case, noble Consort Lin probably won't let the matter rest, the black-clothed youth muttered softly. Emolian snorted. Then let her gather 100 mid-grade magnetite herself and redeem him from the Heavenly Dao sect. We don't need to care. Yes, sir. Emolian turned around and glanced at Arbor's small courtyard, a faint light swirling in her eyes. Sir, shouldn't we have a good chat with that mystic cultivator girl and see if we can recruit her into the Dragon Saliva Guard? The black-clothed youth continued. She's a good seedling that's hard to come by. We can't let the Heavenly Dao sect benefit from her. Emolian glanced at him and said with a spurious smile, This ice-cold little girl isn't as easy to fool and approach as you imagine. From what I see, this little thing's heart is forged from 1,000-year-old cold stone at such a young age. However, when he thought of that little girl's expressionless face, he wanted to tear it open and dig out the little thing inside. It really did seem very interesting. Arbor was carried to sit on a stool, her hands still hugging that box of ointment. Her mother sized her up from head to toe for a moment, and her wooden little face almost collapsed. She truly felt a bit helpless. She was no longer a child. Disregarding those days of wandering aimlessly in the void, she had lived for at least 26 years in her previous life. Jojo, you scared Mama to death. Wei Ziqin hugged her daughter and said half grumpily and half anxiously, You can't be so inconsiderate in the future, okay? Arbor nodded. When she looked up and saw that her father's eyes were filled with abnormal joy, she couldn't help but raise her brows and snicker inwardly. She was very familiar with her father's gaze. It was a gaze filled with anticipation, gratification, and pride. Did he think that she had won honor for the Chow family? She remembered that her father was also a mystic cultivator in the past. He activated his mystic meridians at the age of 11 and was taken away by the Chow family in Guanlan City at the age of 12 for intensive grooming. At the age of 13, he amazed the world with a single brilliant feat in the clan competition and was taken away by Daybreak Sect, one of the 3 sects that came to select talents. Everyone thought that Xiao Zhongbong would have a meteoric rise and that his future would be limitless. But unexpectedly, at the age of 15, he was sent back to Quoto Village and was no longer able to regain his former glory. His profound veins were damaged and his profound strength was lost, causing him to be looked down upon by everyone in the clan. But it was this foolishly filial man who, after receiving so much unfair treatment, was still extremely loyal to his family and still had deep expectations and thoughts for his clansmen. Naive? Kind? What's the use of this thing? When life is in despair, these beautiful fairy tales can only be found in fairy tales. They can't pull people out of the abyss. They can't. Chow family? What was the Chow clan? She had opened her mystic meridians at the age of 7 in Arbor and entered the ranks of mystic cultivators. She didn't care for this so-called glory at all. Whether it was now or in the future, her achievements and everything she could control in the future would have nothing to do with the Chow family. She had climbed up bit by bit from hell where the void was shattered and from the yellow springs of infinite despair. Her heart had long turned into a deep, icy spring. She couldn't summon the slightest bit of warmth or tenderness toward those hypocritical clansmen. Jojo. Her mother's call caused her expression to relax slightly. Her eyes were no longer as cold as before as she calmly looked over. Wei Ziqin dazedly glanced at her daughter. She felt that ever since her daughter accidentally rolled down the hill in front of the school 3 days ago and woke up from her coma, her temperament seemed to have undergone a great change. Something seemed to be different from before. Chapter 17. Jojo, can you tell father how you activated your mystic meridians? Xiao Zhongbong looked into his daughter's pitch-black eyes and was momentarily stunned. His daughter's eyes were so deep that it made one's heart sink. It was an indescribable feeling. In theory, everyone could activate their mystic meridians at the age of 7 under the guidance of the Mystic Cultivator Association's guidance. However, in reality, not everyone could successfully activate their mystic meridians at the age of 7. In fact, during the 7th month of every year, there would be guidance teachers overseeing the major cities and towns. They would wait for the children from the nearby villages to head to the designated location to help them activate their mystic meridians and test their mystic strength. Every year, there would be children who would attempt to activate their mystic meridians, but most of them came with hope and returned with disappointment. Those who could become mystic cultivators were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. Some children would attempt to activate their mystic meridians year after year with hope, but they would return with disappointment and even despair. When they reached the age of 15, the guidance teacher would solemnly announce that they had failed to activate their mystic meridians and had no hope of becoming a mystic cultivator in this lifetime. In theory, boys and girls over the age of 15 had no hope of activating their mystic meridians and becoming a mystic cultivator. However, Arbor was an exception in her previous life. She remembered that she activated her mystic meridians on her own at the age of 16 in her previous life. Thus, Senior Brother G's words about a specialized teacher teaching her how to use mystic energy accurately and how to activate the inner world unique to mystic cultivators were not attractive to her. With the memories of her previous life, Arbor knew the basic techniques of controlling mystic energy. As for her inner world, she did not need anyone to teach her. She could just find a free time to return to her room and activate it on her own. Speaking of which, even after living 2 lives, she still did not understand what was going on with her mystic meridians. Whenever she wasn't paying attention, her profound veins would mysteriously open on their own. For example, when she was fighting Liu Yexin this time, she had naturally covered her weapon with a layer of profound energy. She didn't even realize when she had opened her profound veins until Crown Prince Lien gave her the signal. If things were to develop according to the trajectory of her previous life, wasn't it a little too early for her to activate her mystic meridians at the age of 7? What did it mean that it was early by a full 9 years? Perhaps many things had changed with her rebirth. Everything was undergoing earth-shattering changes. Arbor's eyes deepened as he fell into deep thought. Jojo. Seeing their daughter in a daze, her parents felt a little helpless. Why do I feel that my daughter's mind is wandering more and more these days? Jojo. Thump, 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 thump. Rapid knocks on the door shook the door. Wei Ziqin hastily turned around to open the door. Just as she opened the door, a hoarse voice shouted, "Eldest sister-in-law, the moment I entered the village, I heard the villagers say that our old Xiao's family produced a 7-year-old mystic cultivator. Ha ha ha, is that our Jojo? Where's Jojo?" "Second uncle, you're back." Wei Ziqin hurriedly stepped aside with a smile and invited Xiao Zhongxing in. The two hadn't taken more than 2 steps, one in front and one behind, when they heard a commotion outside the door. Young Aunt Su Jiao pinched her throat and quickly walked in, shouting, "Yo, it's eldest brother and sister-in-law." It hasn't even been half a day, but our little Qiao's glorious deeds have spread throughout the village. Mother especially had me come over to tell eldest brother and sister-in-law to bring little Qiao to the main family. When second uncle was invited in by mother, Arbor had already retreated from his mental wandering. When he saw young aunt calling out with a fake smile, he instinctively knitted his brows in displeasure. Chapter 18. It was within Arbor's expectations that elderly Lady Qiao would summon their family in the middle of the night. Arbor was well aware of this elderly lady's personality. She was a selfish, suspicious, jealous, and prideful person. In her previous life, her mother had died of depression partly because of elderly Lady Qiao's sneaky actions. Elderly Lady Qiao was a hypocrite who secretly pranked her mother to death while bragging about how good she was to her eldest daughter-in-law. If elderly Lady Qiao didn't ascertain her identity overnight, she definitely wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. Of course, Arbor believed that after elderly Lady Qiao ascertained her identity as a mystic cultivator, she would probably be burned by the flames of jealousy and be unable to sleep for an entire night. When Wei Ziqin held Arbor's hand as they walked through the door, she glanced around and saw an elderly lady sitting at the head of the table. Her appearance matched that of the mean and thin elderly lady in her memory. She had a dark and thin face, sharp cheeks, and a pair of gloomy old eyes. No matter how much she dressed up like an elderly lady from a wealthy family, it couldn't conceal the pettiness in her bones. Mother, Father Qiao Zhongbang, Mother Wei Ziqin, second uncle Qiao Zhongxing, and youngest aunt Su Jiao all bowed respectfully to elderly Lady Qiao. After youngest aunt bowed, she walked to her husband Qiao Zhongheng's side and chuckled as she held on to her 4-year-old son, little chubby Qiao Long. The small hall was filled with people, other than eldest aunt Qiao Wanqiu, who was married off to Lu City District, second uncle, youngest uncle's family, and youngest aunt Xiao Wanwan, who was about to get married this September, were all present. Arbor couldn't help but snicker inwardly. It really was a tripartite hearing. This old one was actually present at the gathering just now, but this old one was rather far away from the crowd, so I didn't see clearly what happened. It's just that I heard from the villagers that our old Xiao family produced the youngest mystic cultivator in the village, so this old one wanted to ask you clearly whether this matter is true or not. As elderly Lady Qiao spoke, her gloomy eyes stared unwaveringly at Xiao Mu. The funny thing was that his foolish father thought that old madam was as happy and proud as he was that her daughter had become a mystic cultivator, so he impatiently summoned them overnight to clarify things. Qiao Zhongbang nodded and said with a smile, "Mom, don't worry. This is definitely true. We saw it with our own eyes. Also, the experts from Tiandao sect have confirmed that our Qiao is a mystic cultivator." The old lady's eyebrows and lips drooped as she grunted in agreement. Then, she asked coldly, "I heard that in Arbor, she sternly rejected the invitation of senior brother Ji from Tiandao sect? He even dared to injure a young miss of the heavenly Dao sect? Is this true?" Xiao Zhongbang's heart sank. He hurriedly lowered his head and answered respectfully, "It's like this, mother. That miss from Tiandao sect made the first move. I'm asking you if this matter is true?" Elderly Lady Qiao angrily shouted with a frown as she heavily slammed the black wooden table. Xiao Zhongbang immediately knelt on the floor and nodded in fear and trepidation. "Yes, it's true. Mom, don't be angry." His mother was a widow with 3 sons and 2 daughters. She had painstakingly raised them to adulthood and started a family after so many years. All the children in the family had absolute respect for this widow, including Qiao Zhongbang. Seeing that his mother was angry, Qiao Zhongbang immediately gave in. "Foolish!" Elderly Lady Qiao fiercely reprimanded. "The children are insensible. But are you 2 adults also insensible? What kind of place is Tiandao sect? Is it something you can offend? Is Tiandao sect's young miss someone a village girl like her can hit or scold?" Elderly Lady Qiao slammed the table and chair loudly as she angrily reprimanded. "You're pushing old Xiao's family into a frying pan and roasting it." Chapter 19. Old Madame Qiao scowled and her father, Qiao Zhongbang, immediately felt ashamed and apologized profusely. Xiao Mu averted her gaze, and a frigid smile spread across her lips. She had long given up hope for her father, so she wasn't disappointed when she saw him immediately concede to old Madame Chiao. Arbor. Old Madame Chiao coldly called out her name. While the guests from Tiandao sect haven't left yet, go apologize to Miss Lu from Tiandao sect tomorrow. Even if you have to kowtow 9 times for every 3 steps, go through fire and water, you have to do it. In any case, you must obtain Miss Lu's forgiveness and don't cause trouble for our Chiao family. I'm talking to you. What kind of attitude is that? Old Madame Chiao couldn't help but become furious when she saw that the child tilted her head and refused to look at her. After talking for so long, he didn't react at all. Old Madame Chiao had never liked this cowardly child who hid from everyone. She could tell that the child was petty and unpresentable. Whenever she saw the child's evasive gaze, she would get angry. But today, the situation was a little strange. This child wasn't like before, hiding behind her mother, Wei Ziqin, whenever she was scolded and counting her fingers pitifully. Instead, the gaze she occasionally shot over was as dark as a pool of stagnant water in an old well, making old Madame Chiao feel very uncomfortable. Jojo, father, Xiao Zhongbang, also frowned and turned to look at Arbor, who was tilting her head. Grandmother is talking to you. When Xiaomu heard this, she turned her head and stared straight at elderly Lady Qiao, who was sitting at the head of the table. Elderly Lady Qiao's entire body shuddered from this bone-chilling gaze, and she reflexively leaned back. Jojo didn't do anything wrong. Mother, Wei Ziqin, was eager to protect her daughter and hurriedly argued. Miss Lu made the first move. If Jojo didn't dodge, he would have. Shut up. The old lady was frightened by Arbor and felt a trace of fear in her heart. Now that she saw her daughter-in-law, who was usually submissive, actually dared to refute her, she couldn't help but feel angry. She angrily scolded and interrupted Wei Ziqin's words. Who was Miss Lu? Who was Arbor? So what if she was scolded and beaten by Miss Lu? Was it worth it for her to retaliate so heavily? Don't think that just because this child has entered the ranks of mystic cultivators now, she thinks she's invincible and can look down on everyone. Tiandao's sex strength is right there. Are you trying to hit a rock with an egg and seek your own destruction? Mother, please calm down. Xiao Zhongbang hurriedly comforted her and turned to give Wei Ziqin a look, telling her to shut up and stop talking. I'll leave this matter to you guys. The old lady harumphed coldly and stood up. Zhongbang, if you still see me as your mother and are still willing to listen to your mother, then you will personally escort your good daughter to Tiandao sect's camp tomorrow and solemnly apologize to Miss Lu. Arbor curled his lips and stood to the side without saying a word. That was fine. She would wait until tomorrow to see if her father would really escort her to Tiandao sect to apologize. She would see if this man she called father would further disappoint her and her mother. Arbor's eyes contained a smile, but that smile was gloomy and cold. The moment they met, the old lady's entire body trembled, and her teeth chattered as she involuntarily shivered. When she looked again, the old lady's eyes were so calm that there wasn't the slightest ripple. How could anyone tell that the girl was smiling? She stood there, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to be a black gate to hell. Countless bony hands burrowed out of the ground and roared soundlessly. A cold snort that resembled a wooden sculpture appeared at the corner of the little girl's mouth, inexplicably raising goosebumps. Chapter 20. Ziqin, wait Ziqin. After exiting the main door, Wei Ziqin picked up Arbor without a word and hurried on her way. She didn't even bother to look at Xiao Zhongbang. Ziqin. Xiao Zhongbang caught up with the mother and daughter in 3 steps and reached out to take Arbor from Wei Ziqin's arms. Ziqin, calm down and listen to me. Wei Ziqin suddenly turned sideways and avoided Xiao Zhongbang's arm. I don't want to listen to anything. My Jojo didn't do anything wrong. If she didn't resist at that time, would she have waited to be killed? Your mother is unreasonable. My Jojo won't apologize to anyone. If you want to do it yourself. Go and do what you promised your mother. Ziqin, how can you say that to mother? It's not easy for mother. Shut up. Wei Ziqin's sudden outburst shocked Arbor. One must know that in her previous life, Wei Ziqing's personality was so soft that even when old lady Qiao bullied her, she would always swallow her anger. This time, her mother went against the mother and son of the Qiao family for her. Although Arbor didn't say anything, her heart was filled with gratitude. This was her mother. So in your mother's eyes, that Miss Lu is high and mighty and incomparably honorable. My daughter isn't human? What's wrong with beating and scolding her? If she's not good, why doesn't she send herself to be beaten and scolded? Miss Lu is the daughter of a sect and a noble family. My daughter is also the apple of my eye. No one can bully her. Wei Ziqing's voice choked as she spoke. She glared at Xiao Zhongbong with red eyes and said, Xiao Zhongbong, let me tell you, if this continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to live anymore. Xiao Zhongbong was dumbfounded. He watched as his wife hugged their daughter and left in a huff. He sighed bitterly and hurried after them. When they reached home, Wei Ziqing turned around to close the door. Xiao Zhongbong hurriedly blocked the door with his body and tried his best to squeeze himself in. Looking at her father's disheveled appearance, Xiao Mu inwardly pursed her lips. Ziqing, tell me, why are you so impulsive? You're pregnant, so careless. Xiao Zhongbong went forward to help Wei Ziqing. The latter didn't appreciate his kindness at all. She flung him off and went into the house. With a bang, she slammed the door in Xiao Zhongbong's face. Let me tell you, Xiao Zhongbong, I, Jojo, will not apologize to that spoiled and arrogant young lady tomorrow. Xiao Zhongbong stared dumbfounded at the tightly shut door. His head drooped dejectedly. She heard her mother's even breathing. Wei Ziqing was frightened and tired today. She fell asleep as soon as she lay down on the bed. 3-year-old Jolin's chubby little body was next to her mother. She was also sleeping very soundly. Arbor's little hand gently stroked her little sister's chubby little face. The image of a child lying in the rain with bruises all over his body and his cheeks so thin that they were almost sunken and flashed before her eyes. She shook her head violently and subconsciously held Jolin's little hand tightly. In this life, the three of them would never walk the same path as before. Jolin groaned in pain from being pinched. Arbor hurriedly let go of her hand. She took a deep breath and slowly closed her eyes. She had a myriad of thoughts. At one moment, she remembered that the zombie outbreak was about to happen. She had to hurry and prepare to buy some necessities. At the next moment, she thought about buying a large amount of goods. Why don't I discuss it with second uncle Qiao Zhongxing? Second uncle was the owner of the bun shop in town. It should be fine to ask him to buy things. As she pondered, Xiao Mu sank into dreamland. In her dream, the little girl walked barefoot with a confused look on her face. When she stepped on something, the soles of her feet hurt a little. In reality, Arbor was snuggling up to her mother. She wasn't sleeping very well, and her delicate little eyebrows were furrowed. How could she step on something that hurt her feet when she was sleeping on the bed? It really made her speechless. Little Arbor forcefully lifted one of her little feet. When she looked up, she was completely stunned. Chapter 21. The child subconsciously reached out and pinched her thin cheeks. Yes, it doesn't hurt. She must be dreaming, hee. No wonder she saw a mountain of jewelry that was more than 10 meters high when she looked up, because her little feet were stepping on red, blue, and green gems that were so dazzling that they blinded her eyes. The soles of her feet hurt a little. Our dear Xiaomu reflexively moved her big toe that was sticking up. Why can her toes move? She opened her small mouth and pinched her arm again. She really didn't feel any pain. Yes, she must be dreaming. Thinking about it, she couldn't help but find it funny. It seemed that what she thought about during the day, she dreamed about it at night. She had been thinking about how to get some money to replenish her supplies before the zombie disaster broke out. In the middle of the night, she dreamed of a mountain of wealth filled with jewelry. Ha, this is too funny. The child supported her chin with her hand and squatted down with a smile. She tilted her head and looked around. This place really wasn't big. It was only about 15 cubic meters, like a square box. The four sides and the sky were covered by a huge purple crystal screen. Purple crystal screen? That's not right. Why did she feel that it was getting more and more familiar? The child moved his rolling eyes and fixed his gaze on a pair of human-shaped stone sculptures that were as tall as a 3-story building beside the Golden Jewel Mountain. The stone statues were about the same height as the mountain of jewelry. She couldn't see their faces, but for some reason, Arbor felt that they were inexplicably familiar. She felt a sense of dependence and fondness. She picked up an emerald from the ground and held it in her hand, unconsciously rubbing it. Her little head turned left and right. Suddenly, she jumped 2 steps forward. Her little hands dug around in the pile of jewelry for a while and pulled out a delicately carved food box made of red sandalwood. Hee. Arbor couldn't help but want to laugh. This dream was too funny. She saw gold, silver, and jewelry, and then she saw a food box. She used force with her 2 little hands and opened the lid of the food box. Ha! There were indeed 2 rows of 10 cute white and chubby meat buns. There were also a few round lollipops stuck in the gaps between the meat buns. How much of a money grubber was she to be able to dream of a mountain of gold and silver and dig out a food box filled with meat buns and lollipops from the mountain of gold? Ha! Xiaomu laughed 3 times. Suddenly, she felt her body being shaken. Arbor opened her eyes in a daze and looked at the 2 faces in front of her, one big and one small. Sister, what kind of sweet dream are you having? You just said. Ha. I see meat buns. Xiaomu's head. Xiaomu, Xiaomu, Xiao, 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 Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao Xiao, Qi Xiao Xiao, Xiao Espuft. On the side, Wei Ziqin could not hold back her laughter. She picked up her chubby youngest daughter and held Xiaomu's hand to pull her up. Xiao Xiao is having a sweet dream, right? Come on, we have to get up. Mother will go out to prepare breakfast. Jojo, take Xiaolin to wash up. After Wei Ziqin finished speaking, she got up, pushed the door open and left, leaving the little fatty Jolin behind. He shook her hand with all his might, trying to pull her off the bed. Sister, wait. Xiaomu sat cross-legged on the bed, motionless. She closed her eyes and breathed in silence, shutting off her 5 senses as she guided a weak mystic energy to slowly circulate through her newly opened mystic meridians. This profound vein was extremely small and weak. Among the various tendons in the body, it was so weak that it was negligible. However, this was a necessary path to embark on the path of a mystic cultivator. Many people stopped before the mystic veins and were unable to step through the threshold of a mystic cultivator for the rest of their lives. Arbor held his breath and concentrated. He gathered this weak Xian energy into a strand and rushed it to the space between his eyebrows, turning it into a thin strand of Xian sense. Chapter 22. Arbor was a bit excited. She didn't expect that she would be able to condense mystic energy between her brows and transform it into mystic conscious in an instant. In her previous life, she remembered that she had spent a total of 7 days, day and night, before she finally condensed her profound energy into profound consciousness. The teacher who guided her even said that this kind of aptitude was considered not bad, and that her speed of condensing profound consciousness was more than 3 times faster than ordinary people. Only those who could condense mystic conscious could be considered to have truly stepped into the ranks of mystic cultivators and be able to use mystic conscious to open the door to their own inner world. Otherwise, if a mystic cultivator couldn't even open their own inner world, they would be a laughingstock. At this moment, the instant Arbor's mystic conscious formed, the excess mystic energy all retreated back to the mystic domain in the center of her lower abdomen. The mystic domain that her eyes could see now was only the size of an olive pit, so the mystic energy it could store was naturally pitifully little. Arbor secretly estimated that her current cultivation was probably around level 3 mystic cultivator. However, with her current age, a level 3 mystic cultivator was definitely in existence that would make everyone's jaws drop. In her previous life, the importance of mystic conscious was only recognized in the later stages of battle. Many great mystic cultivators who had already stepped into level 10 had devoted themselves to researching how to strengthen mystic conscious and expand their inner world. Mystic conscious was condensed from mystic energy. If a person had 100% mystic energy, the mystic conscious they could condense would definitely not exceed 10% in the initial stage, and their inner world would naturally be pitifully small. However, through research in the later stages, mystic conscious could slowly increase through continuous training and strengthening. If a level 3 mystic cultivator's mystic conscious could reach 30% of mystic energy, it would definitely be much more powerful than someone with 10%. In battle, regardless of whether it was the speed or strength of mystic energy exerted, the two could not be mentioned in the same breath. At this moment, Arbor could clearly see the thin mystic conscious condensed in her mind gradually transform into a pair of frail little hands that forcefully pushed open a large door filled with white mist. Then, that pair of little hands transformed into a barefooted little person that shuffled through the door with great familiarity. Arbor's eyes flickered as she carefully looked at that little person's back figure. Fuck, wasn't this her mystic conscious avatar? Wait, mystic conscious avatar. How could something like an apparition appear now? She remembered that in her previous life, she had cultivated for close to 10 years before she finally succeeded in condensing something as high and mighty as an apparition of consciousness. This was because after the profound sense was transformed into a physical form, it could cultivate on its own at all times within the pool of consciousness. Compared to ordinary people who spent a lot of effort and constantly used various training methods to condense profound energy to strengthen and shape the profound sense, it was much simpler. A person with an apparition was like sitting on a mountain of gold and a group of strong, free labor. They just had to wait for the gold to fall into their pockets piece by piece. They probably didn't even need to count. Hee, wait a minute. She might not have woken up from her dream. Why did the enclosed space that looked like a small box that the apparition had swayed into look so familiar? Wasn't this the scene of the golden mountain in her dream? No wonder he looked so familiar. Wasn't this the inner world that she had obtained in her previous life? The purple crystal curtains that filled the front, back, left, right, and top were, to put it bluntly, the walls of the inner world that formed a world. This was her inner world. Arbor opened her eyes and sat on the bed in a daze for a long time, forgetting to make a sound. Why was there a pile of gold and jewels in her newly opened inner world? There was also a food box filled with so many spicy meat buns buried under the gold mountain. She remembered that when she first entered the inner world in her previous life, that place was twice as small as it was now. Moreover, once she entered, other than the walls, there was really nothing else. Chapter 23. She couldn't figure it out. No matter what, she couldn't figure it out. How could her inner world, which was supposed to be empty, contain so many gold, silver, jade, and jewels? Arbor tried to move a gold brick out of her inner world. As a result, she felt a slight stabbing pain in her mind, causing her to subconsciously close her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, that rare mystic sense had already retreated from her inner world, and the door to her inner world had naturally closed. The apparition of her mystic sense was most likely locked in her inner world, and she could only let it fend for itself. Arbor sighed softly. With such weak mystic energy, she naturally couldn't condense her mystic sense for too long. This meant that even if she had a mountain of treasures, she wouldn't be able to take anything out. She thought for a moment and tried to move a small square wooden table in the corner of the room into her inner world. Then, she couldn't help but roll her eyes. What was the point of only storing it and not taking it out? If Crown Prince Lien saw her wooden expressionless face suddenly make such a cute expression, he would definitely exclaim that it was amusing. In reality, it wasn't that Xiao Mu didn't understand this logic. Storing items in her inner world expended very little mystic conscious, unless she was storing them in large quantities, which was a different matter altogether. Just storing 1 or 2 items in small quantities would expend a negligible amount of mystic conscious. On the other hand, retrieving things from her inner world expended a lot of mystic sense. Regardless of its value, the larger and heavier the item, the more mystic sense expended. Without enough mystic sense, the door to her inner world would naturally close. Theoretically speaking, it was impossible to retrieve anything from it. Although that gold brick wasn't big, it wasn't light. With her current mystic sense, she wouldn't be able to retrieve it. Arbor didn't force her. She planned to rest for a while and see if she could retrieve something at night. Big sister, table, table, little Xiao Lin called out in her childish voice, her chubby little finger pointing straight at a corner of the room. That small wooden table just disappeared in front of this baby's eyes just like that. Arbor ignored the little fellow and took her little hand. The two sisters casually washed up and left the room. As soon as they stepped out of the door, they saw second Uncle Qiao, Zhongxing, sitting at the dining table at the entrance of the courtyard. He smiled and waved at the two sisters. Jojo, Xiao come and eat porridge. Arbor's face was expressionless, but he was secretly happy. He thought that he would find a way to talk to his second uncle alone later. However, the good times didn't last long. Just as the two sisters picked up their bowls and took 2 mouthfuls of porridge, the peaceful and serene morning light was completely broken by a bang. Wei Ziqin hastily dashed out of her room, and she immediately saw Su Jiao leading 2 brawny men into their courtyard. Sister-in-law. Xiao Zhongbang stood up from the table with a slightly awkward expression. He looked at the 2 brawny men behind little aunt Su Jiao and hesitated to speak. On the other hand, it was second Uncle Qiao, Zhongxing, who slammed his chopsticks on the table with a bang and bellowed, "Su Jiao, what are you doing? You came to Big Brother's house in broad daylight, and this is how you break in without being invited?" "Big Brother, second brother, I'm really sorry. It wasn't me who wanted to come. It was elderly lady who ordered me to escort Arbor to Long Gate Inn to apologize to Miss Liu." Su Jiao flattened her bright red lips and slanted her eyes at the 2 brawny men behind her. "What are you waiting for? Do it. Su Jiao, you're deliberately coming to provoke us." Second Uncle Qiao, Zhongxing, immediately stood up. Seeing the brawny men step forward to grab Arbor, Qiao Zhongxing didn't say another word and punched the brawny man's cheek. The brawny man covered his face in pain and took a step back. Wei Ziqin rushed forward with a pale face and pulled Arbor into her embrace. Chapter 24. What a clown! Arbor swept a dismissive glance at Su Jiao, but Wei Ziqin hastily pushed her daughter behind her as if she was facing a great enemy. "Su Jiao, don't go overboard," Xiao Zhongxing angrily rebuked with a taut face. "Second brother, I won't be happy if you say that. I also received elderly lady's orders to come and handle this matter." Su Jiao pursed her lips impatiently. "If this matter isn't handled well and elderly lady blames us, will second brother take responsibility, or will eldest brother and sister-in-law take responsibility?" Just as Wei Ziqin was about to speak, a soft and small hand pressed down on the back of her hand. Arbor walked out from behind his mother and stood in front of Su Jiao. He said apathetically, "Wait for me." The adults looked at each other in dismay. Arbor's small figure circled around the woodshed before quickly appearing in front of Su Jiao again. "We can go now." Su Jiao was stunned. Wei Ziqin was even more anxious as she went up to grab her daughter. "Jojo, you can't go with them. They want to force you to apologize to Miss Liu." How could she allow her daughter to take risks by herself again? Why did such a young daughter have to bear such great pressure? There were so many people from the Heavenly Dao sect gathered at Long Gate Inn, yet her daughter was all alone at such a young age. How could this do? "Don't worry, mother." Arbor nodded slightly at Wei Ziqin before turning to Qiao Zhongxing. "Second uncle, I'll be back soon." Afterwards, she raised her leg and kicked the calf of a burly man on the left. She put her hands behind her back and raised her chin slightly as she coldly said, "What are you spacing out for? Lead the way." Qiao Zhongxing was instantly amused. His little niece was so small, but when she put on airs, she was really quite impressive. The burly man who was kicked was secretly shocked. He only felt that the little girl's seemingly light kick made his calf sore and painful. When he took the time to sneak a glance, he found that his calf was already bruised and purple. The shock in his heart grew even greater. Su Jiao followed him out the door and lightly coughed. She swept a rather uncomfortable glance at Arbor. "What did you do in the woodshed just now?" Arbor glanced at her casually. "Of course I can't leave empty-handed when I'm visiting someone else's house. What a disgrace to your Qiao family." Su Jiao was instantly a bit surprised. "So you're saying that you've even prepared a gift?" Arbor ignored her. This child probably wouldn't talk more than 3 sentences. If others asked too many questions, she would be too lazy to answer. There was only that one inn in the entire Kwoto village, and it was located at the entrance of the village. It couldn't be said to be very luxurious, but there were still quite a few people coming and going to stay there. Su Jiao had the 2 burly men stay outside Long Gate Inn while she led Arbor inside. After asking for the Heavenly Tao sect's Miss Lu's room, she brought Arbor to the elegant room on the 2nd floor. There was no one in front of Lu Yexin's door. Presumably, the other disciples of the Heavenly Tao sect were resting in their own rooms. Su Jiao reached out to push Arbor. After going in, properly apologize to Miss Lu and repent for your previous rudeness. You must coax Miss Lu well, or else you'll suffer when you return. Arbor coldly glanced at Su Jiao. For some reason, Su Jiao felt that this child's dark eyes were a bit frightening. There wasn't the slightest bit of warmth in those contrasting black and white eyes, as if they were covered in a layer of 1,000-year-old ice and snow. They didn't resemble a child's eyes at all. After Arbor entered the room, he closed the door behind him and curled his lips at Lu Yexin, who was sitting up. "What are you doing here?" Lu Yexin's gaze landed on that little fiend, and she couldn't help but cry out in alarm in her heart. Chapter 25. Arbor's small hand loosened, and a moderately sized brick slid from her sleeve into her small hand. Then, without another word, Xiaomu strode forward and viciously smashed the brick against Lu Yexin's head. Lu Yexin's squeal, which sounded like a pig being slaughtered, came from inside the room, causing Su Jiao, who was standing at the door, to have a bad premonition. Just as she was about to push open the door and enter, she saw the door being pulled open from the inside. Xiaomu turned her head back into her sleeve and calmly walked past Su Jiao. Question mark. Su Jiao's face was full of question marks. When she turned around to take a look, she instantly revealed a horrified expression. Could that disheveled and bloody woman who wandered down from the bed in the room be that Miss Lu of the Heavenly Tao sect? Heavens, what kind of sin did she commit? Su Jiao was momentarily enraged, and she reflexively turned around to grab Arbor, who was about to leave. "What did you do?" "Arbor, look at the good deed you've done." Arbor's small hand trembled slightly, and she shook off Su Jiao's hand that was holding her. Su Jiao watched as she stomped down the stairs and left without looking back, and she was dumbstruck on the spot. She had seen naughty and mischievous people. She had never seen someone more mischievous and eccentric than this child. "Tell me, if you were unhappy and came to apologize, you could have just said so. Yet you just had to come along with an amiable expression, and in the end, there was such a huge reversal. How could she endure this?" Su Jiao thought that this was a rather naughty and mischievous behavior, but when she saw that extremely unlucky Miss Lu raise her head, she almost fainted on the spot from anger. Miss Lu's face was plastered with a piece of white paper, and on it was a long string of cursive handwriting. "I came to deliver a gift on grandmother's orders. Now that the gift is complete, no thanks needed. If there is a gift in return, please bring your own brick and bring people to Kwoto Village's Chow family courtyard at Gate 6 to have elderly Lady Chow personally check." Su Jiao was so angry that she laughed. So it turned out that after beating her up, she still hoped that Miss Lu would bring people to elderly Lady Chow to return the gift? By the time Senior Brother Ji and the others from the Heavenly Tao sect heard the commotion and rushed out, Xiao Mu had already left the Long Gate Inn and disappeared without a trace. Even if Su Jiao had 10,000 guts, she wouldn't dare to stay here alone and bear the Heavenly Tao sect's wrath. She was so angry that her heart, liver, spleen, and lungs hurt the entire way back, so she hurried back to inform the elderly lady. After Arbor came out of the inn, she hadn't taken 2 steps when she suddenly looked up. She saw a person jump down from the railing on the 2nd floor of a tea house across the street. The person's clothes fluttered as he appeared in front of her in an instant. Arbor didn't even lift his eyelids. He moved to the side, intending to go around the stall that the man was blocking and pass by. Unexpectedly, the man chuckled, turned around, and stood in front of her again. "Little Jojo, why are you trying to run away as soon as you see me? What have you done this time?" Not far away, 2 young men in black with short lapels couldn't help but raise their hands to cover their faces. They felt that their crown prince was becoming more and more shameless. His Highness, who looked gentle and elegant like a spring breeze on the outside, but was dark and moody on the inside, was walking further and further down the path of shamelessness. Arbor looked up to glare at a certain person. "What are you hiding in your sleeves?" A certain person didn't mind this little wooden doll's harmless gaze in the slightest. Instead, he took a step forward and took the child into his arms, using his hands to pull out the brick in her hands. "What are you holding this dirty thing for?" A certain crown prince had a look of disdain as he directly threw the brick that was still stained with blood on the ground. Then, he took out a clean handkerchief for Xiao Mu to wipe her hands. Xiao Mu felt that if she had the brick in her hands right now, she would definitely hit him on the head. "You really are a crazy person. Are you that familiar with me?" Chapter 26. How are we not familiar? Look, this is already our third chance encounter. Lien blinked, and her hands paused. She suddenly recalled that in these 3 encounters, it seemed that she had coincidentally witnessed the child's violent acts each time. This is probably fate preordained by the heavens, Lien said with a chuckle. With a light flick of her finger, a 5-finger-wide, 7 cun long black object inexplicably appeared in her hand. It was shaped like a ferrule. "In the future, use this to hit people. It's nimble and handy." Lien handed the ferrule to the child and cast a disdainful glance at the brick on the ground. "Don't use such a dirty thing. It'll fall apart after 2 hits, so it's not easy to use. This is good. It's very sturdy. Don't worry about hitting it. It won't break." The 2 accompanying youths in black almost fell to the ground. "Such a small seedling, yet you're courting disaster by leading it astray. Is this really good, Your Highness?" That ferrule looked black and very cold, but it was very warm to the touch. There wasn't the slightest bit of bone-chilling coldness. Holding it in the palm of her hand for a while, she actually felt a trace of warmth. Although this crown prince was a bit neurotic, the things he took out were really good things. For example, the medicine from before, and also this ferrule. If she didn't guess wrongly, this ferrule should be a profound weapon, and its level was very high. At least, with her current level of a level 3 mystic cultivator, she simply couldn't discern the level of this profound weapon. Profound weapon masters had long been submerged in the torrent of Seekong Planet's history. In the past 100 years, a profound weapon master had never appeared on Seekong Planet, not even a level 1 profound weapon master. Many people said that Seekong Planet's soil and water weren't good, so it couldn't produce a profound weapon master. Some also said that it was because there weren't any forging materials. In short, although this whatever crown prince in front of her didn't seem very reliable, the things he took out were really very likable. Xiao Mu's face was taut, and she didn't say anything as she silently stuffed the ferrule into her sleeve. Looking at this child with an awkward personality, Lien almost laughed out loud. "Do you know how to use it?" Lien carried a certain child as she walked forward with a grin, explaining to her how to use the profound armament in a soft voice. "This is a 12th level profound armament. Originally, with your current profound energy, you shouldn't be able to use it. However, I have sealed a portion of its power and temporarily suppressed it to a 3rd-grade profound armament. As your strength increases, so will it. Infusing it with profound energy, you will slowly discover some unexpected uses. You can give it a name." Yes. "Are you sure you didn't just casually come up with a profound armament?" Arbor was silent for 3 seconds before he casually explained. "It's black." Lien. After a while, the black ferrule in the child's sleeve emitted a faint ink-colored brilliance. Lien lowered her head and glanced at him, a hint of emotion flashing through her eyes. This child was really smart. He silently released his own Xian energy into the Xian armament and easily obtained the Xian armament's approval. "What's your name if you look white?" "Whitey. Huang. Huang. All right. Imo, this name wasn't bad. At least it wasn't black. The corner of Lien's mouth twitched slightly, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she glanced at the little fellow. Speaking casually along the way made this little wooden doll momentarily forget that she was currently in a certain someone's arms and was being carried forward. Actually, how could Arbor have forgotten? She was simply shocked to the point that she hadn't recovered her senses yet. A 12th level profound armament. This whatever crown prince used a 12th level profound armament right off the bat. She hadn't even seen a 12th level profound armament in her previous life until she died. Okay. Chapter 27. Activating it with one's mystic energy might not make the mystic artifact obediently recognize its master, especially since this was a level 12 mystic artifact that surpassed Arbor's by many levels. It was already extremely close to a spiritual artifact. Emolien originally thought that he would need to assist the little lass in making the mystic artifact recognize her as its master, but he didn't expect the little fellow to quickly do it herself. This stoic-faced little blockhead was truly full of surprises. For the next few days, I'll be staying in your village in the Long Gate Inn. If there's anything, you can find me anytime. Emolien walked a few steps with Xiao Xiao in his arms as he spoke with a grin. The two lackeys who were following him silently looked at each other and said in their hearts, "This person? Was this really their family's crown prince? Why did it feel like he was switched with someone else? When did their lord become so gentle and affectionate? She could even find him any time to resolve matters, heh?" Xiao Xiao's face was taut as she solemnly looked at Emolien. She finally realized that this person had actually carried her all the way here. Her stoic face was instantly conflicted as she tried her best to maintain a cold expression and kicked his body with her legs. Arbor used his eyes to signal for him to put her down, but the latter looked at her with a confused expression for a long time. Xiao Xiao was so angry that she forcefully struggled. Unfortunately, her small arms and legs were useless. Emolien sent her all the way home before raising his hand to lightly pat her little head and said, "Little Xiaoer, do you need me to explain to your parents what happened at Long Gate Inn today?" Bam! Xiao Xiao directly slammed the door in front of a certain person. Emolien blinked and innocently turned to look at the two sneaky lackeys. "Say, do you think little Xiaoer dislikes me a little?" "How is it a little? It's a lot of dislikes, all right, Your Highness." However, on the surface, the two lackeys were beaming like brilliant flowers as they said in unison, "How could that be? Miss Xiao is innocent and adorable. It's just that she's still young and isn't good at socializing with others. Naive and unaffected, heh. Just that icy paralyzed face that never changes, and you call it cute. Infuriating, you don't even know how to tell lies." Emolien cast a glance at his two insincere subordinates. "You two have been out for quite a while. Return to the Hidden Pavilion tomorrow and report in. Have Hidden Flower properly tighten your bones for you too. At the same time, I'll teach you how to make friends." The eyes of the lackeys almost fell out of their sockets. "No, it's not, Your Highness. The one who doesn't know how to make friends is that little girl Jojo." Another follower hurriedly rushed forward to block the big mouth. He looked at the crown prince who had turned around and put on a cold expression. "Don't worry, Your Highness. We will immediately return to the secret pavilion to participate in the training. We must learn how to make friends." What a joke. Can't you see that this great master is about to turn hostile? Compared to the blabbermouth bodyguard, this one was a smart person. He immediately understood what his master meant. Just saying that Miss Jojo didn't know how to socialize caused him to suffer 10,000 points of damage from a certain great master. He felt that life was so miserable. After Arbor closed the door and blocked Emolien outside, she ran off to find her second uncle, Xiao Zhongxing. Seeing that she had returned safe and sound, Wei Ziqin felt like a huge rock had been lifted from her heart. She happily went to the kitchen to work. Xiaomu had barely taken 2 steps with her small legs when she saw Xiao Zhongxing and her father walking over from the courtyard together. "Second uncle, I have something to say to you." Chapter 28. Jojo. Xiao Zhongbang was just about to ask his daughter about the situation at the Long Gate Inn, but unexpectedly, his daughter didn't even look at him. Instead, she pulled her second uncle and turned around to run. Okay, Jojo, slow down a bit." Xiao Zhongxing was pushed to the side by a pair of small hands onto a stone bench. He somewhat amusedly looked at his niece's serious and tight little face. Second uncle, can you help me buy a lot of supplies? Hating her small arms and legs, she was really too small. Some seemingly simple things were really difficult for her age. Xiao Zhongxing was slightly surprised. Jojo, you want to buy things? You want to buy? Arbor stretched out his hand and placed the box containing 300 taels of gold and 2 bags containing 100 taels of gold in front of Xiao Zhongxing. Second uncle, here are 400 taels of gold. I need you to help me buy a lot of food. It's best if the meat and poultry are raw. I want all kinds of grains, fruits, and the like. In addition, help me find a blacksmith uncle to make 3 of the most durable and comfortable carriages. Also, help me make a batch of pig iron arrows, 10 bows, and 50 swords. That's all for the time being. This is the blueprint for the carriage. Also, second uncle, help me buy 6 fast horses. At least 500 arrows? 800 arrows. If the blacksmith uncle at the village entrance doesn't have enough time, help me buy them from the blacksmith shop in the nearby village. Xiao Zhongxing stared blankly at this child. He subconsciously reached out to touch the child's forehead. It's not hot. It's not hot. Why is this child's mouth full of nonsense? Second uncle, I'm very clear-headed, and I also know what I'm talking about. Arbor pulled down Xiao Zhongxing's hand and firmly looked at Xiao Zhongxing. Second uncle, according to your calculations, 400 taels of gold, excluding the weapons and the cost of the 3 carriages, the remaining money to buy food and meat. How long can it support my family, you, and brother Xiaohu? Xiao Zhongxing stared blankly for a long time, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Jojo, you want to build carriages, arrows, and swords? What do you want to do? Could it be that you want to rebel? You want to overthrow the Mo family's rule? Xiao Zhongxing was amused by his own stupid idea. Arbor turned a deaf ear to his question and continued to ask, Second uncle, can this food last for 3 months? 3 months, of course, is more than enough. Xiao Zhongxing inexplicably took over the little fellow's words. But the 800 arrows and swords you mentioned may not be completed in a few days. 10 days. Second uncle, I want all of these things in 10 days at the latest. Second uncle's bun shop will be temporarily closed for the next few days. Bring brother Xiaohu to my house. I'll have to trouble second uncle to run around these days. Not at all. Xiao Zhongxing was stunned after saying that. Why did he follow the little fellow's rhythm and agree all the way? No, Jojo. Can you tell second uncle? What do you need these things for? Also, apart from those carriages, horses, sabers, and swords, the remaining gold is enough to buy all the grains in 2 to 3 nearby villages. Little guy, you need so much grains? Have you discussed this with your parents? Zhang Tai asked. When did this child become a foodie? Arbor pushed the 400 taels of gold into Xiao Zhongxing's hand. Second uncle, set off in the afternoon. When you buy everything back, I'll tell you the reason. This child. Xiao Zhongxing had a helpless expression. Jojo, we bought so many things. When the time comes, we won't even have a place to pile them up. Second uncle, you forgot that we mystic cultivators have our own inner worlds. Don't worry about buying. There'll definitely be a place to pile them up. Chapter 29. That's right. Xiao Zhongxing slapped his thigh. At the mention of mystic cultivators, he danced with joy again. All right, Jojo, let's not wait until the afternoon. Second uncle will go handle this matter now. Their little Xiao was the first 7-year-old mystic cultivator to appear in old Xiao's family in several hundred years. Every mystic cultivator had their own unique inner world storage item. There weren't many people in the entire Seikong planet who could possess such a high-end item. Xiao Zhongxing was duped by Arbor just like that, and he happily went out to purchase items with 400 taels of gold. Little did he know that he had long forgotten that a mystic cultivator's inner world was usually only 3 to 5 cubic meters. How could it possibly store so many things? Arbor heaved a sigh of relief. Entrusting this matter to second uncle was the most dependable. No matter what second uncle did, he was very serious and honest. Since she said she needed 800 arrows, he wouldn't give her 799. There were only 14 days until the zombie outbreak. As long as she finished preparing the supplies within 10 days, She would have enough time to bring her mother and younger sister to the nearest Shiju city to temporarily settle down. Compared to Kyoto Village, which was the first to be affected and had no ability to resist, Shiju City was second to none in the vicinity in terms of defensive forces and supplies. It could be said that it was the best refuge at the moment. Most importantly, Shiju City wasn't far from Kyoto Village, so it would only take 2 days to get there. After assigning tasks to second uncle, Arbor felt much more at ease. She decided to make a trip to Annie Wu's house tonight and have a good chat with her about life. So tired. I feel like I've finished talking to second uncle for an entire year. Arbor lazily slumped on the recliner in the courtyard. She propped up her chin with one hand and quietly let her mind wander. When Xiao Zhongbang entered, he saw his daughter slumped on the bench in a daze with a wooden expression. "Jojo, time to eat." Xiao Zhongbang took 2 steps forward and was about to reach out to carry his daughter when he saw the little fellow jump off the bench and run toward the dining table without looking back. Xiao Zhongbang couldn't help but be stunned. He finally realized in hindsight that the little girl seemed to have started to dislike him, her father, since an unknown time. Her behavior couldn't be more obvious. She was quite cold and even ignored him as her father. Many times, if Wei Ziqin wasn't around, she wouldn't even bother to say half a word to him. Xiao Zhongbang came to the table and sat down. The family of 4 ate in silence. Wei Ziqin put food in Arbor Xiao Zhongbang's bowl from time to time. Xiao Zhongbang and Xiao Zhongbang ate by themselves, as if the head of the family was excluded. Ziqin. Xiao Zhongbang felt that his voice was a little hoarse. Wu Yinjin said that she has already contacted that family. Another day, she will be able to. Mother, I heard that Ergu's younger sister was sold to a family by her parents. Brother Ergu secretly went to town to visit his younger sister not long ago. He said that the madam and young miss of that family treated him like a cow and scolded and ordered him around all day. Sister Ergo has endless chores every day, but her body is riddled with scars and bruises. Wei Ziqin's pupils visibly contracted. She abruptly threw down the chopsticks in her hand and directly pulled Xiao Zhongbang's arm to turn and leave. Ziqin. Xiao Zhongbang abruptly stood up. Wei Ziqin turned around and roared at him. I can raise my own daughter. Don't make your elderly lady worry about other people's affairs. Don't think that I don't know that Wu Yinjin isn't a good person at all. She and your good sister-in-law Su Jiao are jackals of the same lair. If she wants to earn commission from my daughter, she can dream on. Chapter 30. Xiao Zhongbang felt very depressed. In the past 2 days, he had been constantly arguing with his wife, making him feel physically and mentally exhausted. In addition, his daughter wasn't very close to him, so he couldn't help but secretly reflect in the depths of his heart, wondering if he had really done something wrong. The mother and daughters were too lazy to care about what Xiao Zhongbang was doing outside, so they washed up and went asleep. When it was quiet at night, Arbor quietly opened her dark and deep eyes. She turned her head to look at her mother and sister who were sleeping soundly. Gently lifting a corner of the quilt, Arbor's nimble figure passed through the window. Under the moonlight, the shadows of the trees swayed, but the window didn't move at all. Only a faint ray of moonlight fell on the bed where the mother and daughter were sleeping. Wu Yinjin's mansion was located at the eastern end of the village. It was surrounded by a brick wall that was about the height of a person, and there were several very tall trees planted inside. Arbor's ghostly figure quietly stood at the corner of the wall for a long time. She slightly narrowed her eyes, and with a tap of her foot, she easily jumped up and steadily landed on the top of the wall. Wu Yinjin's courtyard was 4 or 5 times the size of her house. In the empty field, there were several stone tables and stone benches, and there were many sunflowers planted on both sides of the road. Arbor lightly landed on the ground and directly ran towards the backyard. She didn't come here today simply to find trouble with Annie Wu. She wanted to borrow money from Auntie Wu and visit her while she was at it. She remembered that after the zombie outbreak in her previous life, Auntie Wu dug up a ground full of gold and sold it everywhere to find people to exchange for food. Unfortunately, at that time, the price of rice was already tens of millions of gold. If a family had some extra food on hand, they would guard it more closely than gold, silver, and jewels. Arbor softly sighed. So it was said that no matter how much gold and silver you had, it was useless if you couldn't find something to buy it. She thought of the pile of gold and jewels in her inner world, and her small face couldn't help but be filled with melancholy. If she couldn't take it out now, it wouldn't be of much use even if she took it out a few days later. Forget it. If it's a blessing, it's not a disaster. If it's a disaster, it can't be avoided. In this chaotic world, although gold, silver, and jade are useless, looking at such exquisite and gorgeous is also pleasing to the eye. Arbor nimbly jumped into the backyard of Annie Wu's house. He circled around the yard, walked a few steps south from the corner of the wall, then turned back and walked a few steps before he stood still. He pointed his feet on the ground and drew a square rectangle. A cold smile appeared on his small face. Auntie Wu would never have dreamed that the gold in her backyard would disappear overnight. A total of 900 taels of gold. For a village woman, the speed at which she amassed wealth was quite astonishing. Arbor stuffed the 900 taels of gold into a bag and threw it over his shoulder. Carrying the heavy bag, he jumped onto the wall of Wu Yinjin's house. He turned around to take a look, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. A few minutes later, Wu Yinjin and her husband were woken up by the fire outside and jumped out of bed in horror. When they opened the door, they were stunned by the scene before them. Jojo, the little fellow, jumped over the wall of Wu Yinjin's house with a big bag on his back. He saw under an old tree not far away a white-robed, black-haired youth with a smile in his eyes waving at him. Arbor almost slipped and fell to the ground. He secretly cursed in his heart and cursed God of Plague. Carrying the bag, he didn't blush and his heart didn't skip a beat. He looked straight ahead and walked past the youth. Yushio was really speechless. If he hadn't followed His Highness the Crown Prince and witnessed the scene of this little fellow killing and robbing, perhaps he really would have thought that this child was carrying a bag for an outing. Such a small child. His heart is so black. Is it really good for him to be so calm after killing and robbing? Chapter 31. Emolian had just reached out, but before she could touch the big bag on the little fellow's shoulder, she received a cold glare from her. Like a nervous reflex, the little fellow carried the bag defensively and jumped back. Her eyes were full of accusation, as if they were going to rob her a second time. Yushio. Ahem, ahem, ahem. Emolian coughed helplessly. Little Jojo, don't worry. These things are all yours. We won't take a single cent from you. Humph. A certain child made a disdainful sound, carried the bag, and turned to leave. Emolian hurriedly stopped her and took the opportunity to pick up her small body and the oversized bag. In a flash, she jumped onto a tree. At the same time, the entire Wu residence was filled with noise. Many of the villagers carried buckets and basins of water, spontaneously forming groups to put out the fire. Jojo, what grudge does the mistress of this house have with you? Emolian's slender fingertips lightly tapped the tip of the little girl's soft nose. Looking at the little girl's conflicted expression, her mood inexplicably improved. Humph! A certain child proudly turned her head away and stuck her head out to look at the people coming and going at the entrance of the residence to carry water. The displeasure in her heart was instantly shown on her little face. With so many people helping Mrs. Wu put out the fire, how could it burn down? At most, it burned down 2 wings of Mrs. Wu's house. It was far from her wish to burn down half of the Wu residence. How boring. If you don't say anything, then I'll guess. Look, the first time I saw you, you wanted to squash someone to death in a smelly ditch. It's not a smelly ditch. Arbor suddenly turned her head and looked at the youth in front of her with a pair of big black eyes. How is that a smelly ditch? It's at most a small quagmire. You don't even know how to speak properly. Humph, humph. Emolian. The smelly ditch isn't the main point, okay? The main point is that you're killing someone. This is the second time you want to burn someone to death. If you say there's no hatred, I don't believe it. Since you hate this person so much, how about I help you kill her? Don't worry, as long as I make a move, I guarantee she won't live past tonight. Yushio wept silently. His Highness' style is not right. The little kid in front of him is already very cruel. Why is he still leading him astray? Your Highness, Doesn't your conscience hurt by doing this? Arbor's little classmate had a serious expression on his face. No need. You show touching heart. Not bad, not bad. The little kid is still very pure and kind. Then, a certain child's next sentence immediately shattered his worldview. Isn't it too easy for her to die just like that? Arbor said coldly, then looked at the smiling Mo Lien. Do you have a way to keep her alive, but she'll live in hell forever? Yu Xiu widened his eyes slightly. Yes. Mo Lien nodded crisply and patted the child's head. Leave it to me. Arbor was silent for a while. Then his little voice emerged in the night. Can you help me buy a crossbow that can shoot arrows continuously?
Yes.
It's best if it can shoot faster. Don't waste time and can't shoot 2 arrows. No problem. Can you buy enough clothes for my whole family to wear for the next 20 years? The little kid thought for a while and asked again. Yes. Can you make 1,000 iron arrows for me? He didn't feel like he was asking for a yard after getting an inch. No problem. Can you give it to me in 10 days? Okay. Arbor nodded in satisfaction and threw the big bag of gold hanging from his shoulder into Mo Lien's arms. I'll buy you something good to eat if there's leftovers. Yu Xiu. His Highness isn't a foodie, thank you. Mo Lien suddenly picked up the little guy and laughed loudly as she walked away. He suddenly felt that ever since he met this interesting little guy, life seemed to have a bit more fun, as if a trace of vitality had been injected into his life. Yu Xiu. Your Highness, aren't you going to ask why this little girl wants clothes that her whole family can wear for the next 20 years? So, that strange little girl killed and set fire to tonight's house just to take out gold to buy clothes for their family for the next 20 years? Haha. Chapter 32. After sending the crown prince away, Arbor returned home and climbed back into bed through the window as usual. Quietly lying beside her mother, Arbor tried to circulate the mystic energy in her body before closing her eyes. She condensed it into mystic consciousness and opened the door to her inner world. That pile of glittering jewels and gold almost blinded her eyes. Our dear Xiaomu sighed and tried to circulate her mystic consciousness to move a small piece of gold. However, her head hurt slightly again, and the door to her inner world closed with a bang without hesitation. Before it closed, she could see the apparition of her mystic consciousness lying steadily on top of the pile of jewels, not moving at all. It was as if she was completely paralyzed on top of a mountain of gold and silver. The corner of our dear Xiao Mu's mouth faintly twitched. She remembered that the apparition of her mystic consciousness in her previous life wasn't like this. That year, she spent nearly 10 years and finally succeeded in condensing her apparition of mystic consciousness with great difficulty. This little person in her inner world was in a state of cultivation all day and night. How could it be so tired and lazy as to lie on top of a mountain of jewels and gold? The child sighed helplessly. It seemed that it was impossible for her to move some gold bricks to use in the near future. With a melancholy expression, the child fell asleep in a daze. The next day, she woke up near noon. She turned over and sat up. Looking at the bright sun outside, she was momentarily dazed. Why did she sleep for so long? Arbor reached out and knocked on her little head. She raised her head and looked at Wei Ziqin, who hurriedly walked in from the door. Jojo, hurry and get up. Your teacher Jiang is back. The school will resume classes tomorrow. Have you finished your homework? If you haven't, hurry and do it. School? For a moment, Arbor's expression was a bit sluggish. She felt as if she hadn't attended classes in 2 lifetimes. How would she know what homework was? To be honest, she didn't have much of an impression of what teacher Jiang looked like. Only when her mother mentioned him did she vaguely remember that she had attended the only school in the village, Tiny Herb Hall, when she was young. When Wei Ziqin turned around and saw her daughter's dazed look, she couldn't help but laugh. She went forward to make the bed and said, "Okay, hurry up and finish your homework." Previously, teacher Jiang's mother was sick and had been suspended for nearly 10 days. If you can't finish the homework assigned by teacher Jiang within 10 days, oh no, what the hell is homework? She really couldn't remember. Speaking of which, did teacher Jiang assign homework 10 days ago? Isn't that right? She was planning to prepare everything today so that she could sneak into Hullen Mountain the next day and try to find the secret realm of Peach Blossom after exploring the area. This Master Jiang, who had suddenly popped out of nowhere, had completely disrupted her plans. Arbor's little face scrunched up bitterly. After eating, she hurried back to her room and rummaged for her so-called homework. After searching for nearly an hour to no avail, a certain child collapsed onto the bed. I'm not fucking looking anymore. At worst, I'll just go and be nagged by that teacher Jiang tomorrow. If she could see her current mischievous appearance, she would definitely be quite amazed. This was the appearance of the apparition of mystic consciousness that she had glimpsed in her inner world. There was no difference. Our dear Xiaomu sighed for a while. Should she sleep for an hour before getting up to continue searching? However, she didn't expect that once she slept, she would directly sleep until evening. Moreover, her sleep was very restless. In her dreams, there seemed to be a golden thing that kept spinning and swaying in front of her eyes. Chapter 33. The golden light was even more intense than the sun's rays. The initial ray of light seemed to have split into 2, then 4, and continued to split. The light dazzled Arbor until she felt dizzy. She struggled to wake up several times, but it was as if she was being held down by a gust of qi. No matter how hard she tried, she could not open her eyes. She was about to vomit from the dazzling rays of light. Her head was muddled and throbbing with pain. After an unknown amount of time, the rays of light in front of her slowly merged together and gradually transformed into a golden book that was half the height of a person. Xiaomu was dumbfounded. She stared blankly for a while, practically unable to figure out if she was still dreaming or if she was actually experiencing it. At this moment, the golden light faintly dissipated. One by one, golden words slowly jumped onto the cover of the book. Golden Talisman Jade Tome? Arbor actually understood the 4 large, flamboyant words in an instant. Golden Talisman Jade Tome? Could it be that she was still dreaming about this strange situation? The golden book flipped to a page on its own. Lines of small words appeared behind it, floating and disappearing at an extremely fast speed. Fortunately, Arbor's eyesight was superior, and she could read 10 lines at a glance. The small words read, "At the beginning of all things." It carried the 2 energies of yin and yang. Interconnected and integrated, it nourished heaven and earth. If it did not connect, it would produce evil spirits. At the beginning of the universe, heaven and earth contained a vast divine power. The Golden Talisman Jade Tome was born at the same time as heaven and earth. Guided by divine power, it recorded the all-powerful talisman technique. Its attack could slaughter all things, and it could trigger the 2 evils of yin and yang. In the blink of an eye, cities would be destroyed and all things would wither. Its defense could stabilize divine sense and automatically activate the power to protect the divine soul. It could soothe all things in heaven and earth and bring spring to withered trees. Arbor. Haha. What a good dream. This Golden Talisman Jade Tome or whatever, it sounded like it was real. It might as well just say that it was invincible in both offense and defense. What was the vast divine power? What the hell was divine sense? Divine soul? Was there such a strange thing in this world? This was the first time he had heard of such a strange string of words. This lousy book, it didn't even know how to make it up properly. She could still believe it a little if it said that it could activate mystic energy and protect mystic consciousness. She could be considered as someone who had lived 2 lives. It wasn't that she hadn't seen a powerful talisman grandmaster in her previous life. However, there were only a few talisman grandmasters in this world. They were all old men who were hundreds of years old. The only talisman patrician family on Seekong Planet was far away in Guanlan City. The talisman grandmaster in the family wouldn't easily appear in the world. Moreover, talisman techniques were passed down from generation to generation, so there were even fewer talisman masters than mystic masters. Although the art of talismans was rather mystical, there was no talisman master who could annihilate a talisman with a flick of his finger. If things went wrong, the talisman master might have only thrown out 2 talismans before the mystic cultivator rushed up and killed him in a matter of minutes. Where did the ability to destroy cities and wither all living things come from? Are you sure you're not joking? The child scoffed and forced himself to wake up from the swaying golden light again. But the result made him feel a little sad. The golden talisman jade tome was emitting a heavy pressure that made it impossible for her to move, let alone open her eyelids. What on earth was this damn book up to? Our dear Xiaomu was so angry that she was forced to focus all her attention on that book. After the lines of small characters on the golden talisman jade tome were quickly annihilated, another page flipped over. Beginner-level talisman techniques? Why was this dream so realistic? Did it really record the heart and finger techniques for talisman techniques? Arbor was a little dumbfounded. His head was full of fog and bafflement. Chapter 34. When she wanted to take a closer look at it, she suddenly saw that large golden book suddenly fly up in front of her eyes. The golden book suddenly turned into powder. Layers upon layers of fragmented golden powder fluttered in the air and reformed into 12 jade slips. Like flowing light, they flew into her consciousness in an instant. Arbor immediately sat up from the bed with a whoosh. Her head felt as if it had been hammered by several large hammers for a while. It was so painful that her entire body was somewhat swaying. Arbor subconsciously reached out to hit her little head. Knitting her brows, she hurriedly sat cross-legged and pressed her hands down lightly. Her aura slightly sank as she condensed a strand of profound energy into profound consciousness. She carefully probed into her own consciousness, wanting to find out what was going on. With this look, the little fellow couldn't help but stare blankly. Other than the 12th grade feral that she had stored away earlier, her consciousness was originally empty. There were only a few strands of pitiful milky white profound consciousness that were about to die. They were like ghosts, drifting all over her consciousness. But now, what was going on with those 12 jade slips that had shrunk into a cylindrical shape? She remembered that this thing was definitely not something that she had stored into her consciousness on her own. So when she was unable to move and was paralyzed on the bed earlier, it wasn't a dream at all. Instead, there really was a foreign object that had brazenly barged into her consciousness? Strange. Arbor thought about it from beginning to end, but she still couldn't figure out where that golden talisman jade tome had come from. She had only been at home looking for homework and then lying on the bed to rest for a while. How could she have inexplicably obtained a talisman inheritance like this? Ever since she had been reborn, it seemed like everything had become a little off. First, her profound energy had awakened much earlier than in her previous life. Next, her inner world was greatly different from her previous life. There were even more inexplicable things in her inner world. Now, even her consciousness wasn't right. How could her consciousness have absorbed that golden talisman jade tome without any precaution? If by any chance this caused damage to her consciousness, she wouldn't even be able to find a place to cry. No, shouldn't the main point be the origin of that golden talisman jade tome? How in the world did this thing suddenly run into her conscious? Xiaomu struggled to open her eyes, but she did not think for more than 3 minutes before her entire body once again fell backward, paralyzed on the bed. He didn't know if it was because this book had suddenly flown into his sea of consciousness, but his head was still hurting. I really want to sleep. Jojo, get up, get up. Arbor opened his eyes in a daze and saw his mother's enlarged face. Oh my God, just how tired are you? You've been sleeping since yesterday evening until now. Get up quickly. If you don't go out now, you'll be late for school. Wei Ziqin gently shook her little ignorant daughter, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Arbor took a deep breath and slowly got off the bed. He punched the headboard with his small fist. Boom. What's wrong, Jojo? Wei Ziqin heard the sound when she stepped out of the door. She couldn't help but turn around to ask. Xiaomu stretched out a pair of small claws to scratch her slightly stiff cheeks. She was about to go crazy from anger on the inside. Fuck me, this apparition of the mystic conscious is really something else. Whose apparition of the mystic conscious doesn't properly cultivate in their conscious for the entire night and only makes a fuss in their inner world for you. That strange apparition of profound consciousness also found a pin inlaid with gold beads from God knows where and spent the entire night scribbling non-stop in their inner world. Her head still felt like it had been hammered back and forth by dozens of large hammers. It hurt like hell. Chapter 35. Arbor condensed a strand of mystic consciousness and quickly checked her own conscious. She immediately threw her small hands and jumped off the bed. This abnormal apparition of mystic consciousness had now decisively returned to her conscious, but she was still diligently using that gold bead pen to continue her scribbling. One had to know that she was constantly moving around like she had ADHD, which also consumed student Arbor's mystic energy. Couldn't she just stay in her conscious peacefully and peacefully cultivate her mystic senses like she did in her previous life? Why was she scribbling over there? Arbor covered her small face. She would naturally learn how to draw talismans when she had free time. The main job of the apparition of mystic consciousness was to cultivate mystic consciousness. Was there something wrong with this apparition of mystic consciousness? Instead of cultivating mystic consciousness, she ran all day to draw talismans. She really wanted to beat her to death. Arbor stepped out of the door. With a flick of her finger, 3 strands of faint white light swept past. After the white light dissipated, 3 thin talisman papers lay quietly in her palm. Learning the Golden Talisman Jade Tome's talisman technique wasn't a dream. At least, the apparition of mystic consciousness was still scribbling like a little lunatic. These 3 talisman papers were also strange. They fell from the first jade slip and should be something like a demonstration talisman. The ancient Golden Talisman Jade Tome was a friendly gift. The first one was a speed talisman. For 5 minutes, it could increase one's speed by 3 times. It was essential for escaping. The second one was a strength talisman. It didn't increase mystic energy, but the strength of an ordinary person. For 5 minutes, it could increase one's strength by 5 times. It would be easy to move mountains and rivers and kill a cow with one punch. The last one was more funny. It was called a repetition talisman. As the name implied, it could continuously do the same thing for 5 minutes. This talisman? Arbor turned it over and over in her hand and looked at it. A faint smile flashed in her eyes. It seemed a little interesting. These 3 talismans were all beginner talismans. Beginner and intermediate talismans didn't require mystic energy to activate. They were also quite simple to use. Ordinary people could use them as well. If it was a high-level talisman, it could only be used by injecting mystic energy. The more powerful the talisman, the more mystic energy it would take to open it. Most ordinary people without mystic energy could only look at it and couldn't open a high-level talisman. High-level talisman masters were rare existences. In the talisman aristocratic family of Guanlan City, only 3 high-level talisman masters had appeared in the past 500 years. Of course, each one of them was a powerful figure. Arbor put the 3 talismans into her pocket and headed for Tiny Herb Hall with a bitter face. There were a total of 20 or so children in the village. The oldest was 15 years old and the youngest was 5 years old. They were all stuffed into Tiny Herb Hall. There were only 2 teachers in the hall. Those over 10 years old were taught by Master Tsin, while those under 10 years old were taught by Master Jiang. Tiny Herb Hall was on the west side of the village, and behind it was a small path overgrown with withered grass that led straight to Hulun Mountain. Xiaomu planned to see if she could sneak up the mountain to scout things out. The little guy carried a bundle. As soon as he arrived at Tiny Herb Hall's entrance, he saw 2 porters carrying a bamboo rattan chair over. Sitting on the rattan chair was a little fatty around 9 years old. His chubby leg was propped up, and he was happily gnawing on a chicken drumstick in each hand. 2 lackeys around the same age carried a few bags as they walked along the rattan chair. They held umbrellas and fanned themselves along the way. They smiled obsequiously and said, "Young Master Tao, are you hot? Young Master Tao, do you want some water?" Xiao, would. The young master sitting on the rattan chair suddenly shouted. Chapter 36. Arbor was stunned. She turned her head to look at the chubby boy who suddenly sat up straight on the rattan chair. The chubby boy's eyes were almost squeezed together. When he looked at Arbor, he tried his best to widen his eyes, but they only opened a small gap. Xiaomu narrowed her chilly eyes, and fragments of her memories seemed to flash by. 3 days ago, it seemed that this chubby boy was the one who caused her to roll down the hill in front of the school. Seeing the chubby boy Zhou Tao's face, Arbor remembered that in her previous life, she had been bullied by this little bastard in the village. Although they were all trivial matters, the old and new hatred added together was enough to make a basket of grudges. She originally planned to ignore this little tyrant, but she didn't expect to be stopped by this little brat. Zhou Tao urged the two sedan bearers to carry the rattan chair to Arbor and put him down. He threw away the chicken bone in his right hand and gnawed on the drumstick in his left hand as he shouted at Arbor, "Coward! You actually dare to come here! If you hadn't chickened out that day, we could have gone up the mountain to explore." Xiaomu coldly glared at him before circling around the little fatty and entering the school, heading straight for her classroom. Teacher Jiang hadn't arrived yet. 13 or 14 children under the age of 10 were playing around in the classroom. When they saw Arbor walk in, they all stopped what they were doing and looked at her in unison. Arbor stopped in her tracks. She looked back and forth and frowned slightly. She couldn't remember where she had sat before. That childhood memory was too distant for her to remember. Xiaomu walked forward and picked the last short table before sitting down on the floor. She tossed the small package she was carrying onto the table. Zhou Tao's rattan chair stopped in front of the classroom. He had a look of disbelief on his face as he angrily walked towards Arbor. "Arbor, you coward. Didn't you hear me talking to you? Was this damned girl crazy?" She dared to look at him with such a cold gaze before, and now she completely ignored him. "You're dead meat." Little Fatty glared at her fiercely, then turned to his classmates who were watching the show. He waved his meaty hands and said angrily, "Everyone, attack! Teach this brat a lesson for this young master who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Let her know who has the final say in this village." Xiaomu unhurriedly and surreptitiously took out that repeat talisman from her sleeve and looked at the little fatty with a sneer. "Teacher is about to come. The headmaster is nothing." The fat boy grabbed the drumstick with his right hand and took a big bite. He raised his chin high and continued to talk nonsense. "In this village, our family is the richest. Even the village head, that old man, has to give my father some face. Whoever had the money had the final say. Do you think the headmaster can save you? You're just a little reptile. How dare you look at me with such an arrogant expression? Attack! Beat this cowardly brat to death." But he didn't know that before he said this, Arbor had already thrown a beginner talisman at his chubby belly and ripped it open with his finger strength. The repeat talisman was attached to Fatty's belly through his clothes. Little Fatty didn't know that he was in high spirits, commanding his classmates to go up and beat someone up. Unexpectedly, an angry rebuke came from outside the window. "What are you doing? All of you, stop." Headmaster Jiang walked in angrily. Looking at the group of disappointing students, he waved the rattan ruler in his hand. "Go back to your seats." Fatty was dragged back to his seat with a face full of unwillingness. He turned around and glared at Arbor. Unexpectedly, the latter gave him a cold, wooden smile. In an instant, that smile was like a basin of cold water, directly splashing into the depths of his heart. Chapter 37. Seeing that kind of demon-like gaze, the little fatty shrank his neck in fear. When he turned back to look, he saw that the little girl was expressionless. There was no trace of that terrifying aura. For some reason, the little fatty felt for the first time that the little girl quietly sat in the last row of the classroom, as if she didn't belong to this world. She was so ethereal that it was somewhat inconceivable. He rubbed his eyes and angrily turned his head. He looked up and saw Teacher Jiang's black face and didn't say anything. Teacher Jiang gradually became intoxicated by the poems and was in a wonderful mood. The students below were still quite well behaved. They shook their heads and recited the poems that Teacher Jiang was teaching. However, this harmonious atmosphere didn't last for more than 3 minutes. Arbor's lips curved into a faint sneer. He silently counted down in his heart. 5, 4, 1. Bang! Little Fatty slammed the table and stood up. This fucking loud sound made all of his classmates who were reciting pause in shock. Teacher Jiang, who was intoxicated by the poems, opened his eyes. He looked at the impudent fat child with a stunned expression. Dang, 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 dang. The little fatty aggressively rushed in front of Arbor. He grabbed a handful of air with his right hand and fiercely chewed. He raised his chin high and looked disdainfully at him. Teacher Jiang is nothing. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at the impudent little fatty. They all wondered if this little fatty was stupid. If Teacher Jiang wasn't present, then it was fine for him to act arrogantly. But now that Teacher Jiang was sitting there, he actually repeated the disrespectful words that he had said before without missing a single word. The group of kids under the age of 10 all looked at the brave warrior little fatty with eyes full of reverence. Before Teacher Jiang could fly into a rage, the two dumbfounded little lackeys hurriedly called out, Young Master Tao, and brought Zhou Tao back to his seat. Teacher Jiang took a deep breath. Seeing that the little fatty's father had paid for the renovation of Tiny Herb Hall, today, Teacher Jiang decided to swallow his anger. Go? Bang! The little fatty slapped the table and stood up again. He walked valiantly to Arbor and said, The headmaster is nothing. Pfft. This time, the little kids really couldn't hold it in any longer. Ha ha ha, they all burst out laughing. Why did they feel that little fatty Zhou was especially funny today? Ha ha ha. No matter how slow the little fatty was, he finally felt that something was wrong with his body. The feeling of not being able to control one's own body was truly terrifying. Looking at Teacher Jiang's darkened face, the little fatty slapped the table and stood up for the third time. Little fatty, who had rushed to Arbor and cursed, had a twisted expression on his face. His eyes, which had been squeezed into a slit, contained a trace of fear, and shameful tears overflowed from his eyes. Who could stop all of this? It was so terrifying. Why were his words and actions no longer under his control? Teacher Jiang couldn't take it anymore. He suddenly stood up from his seat, raised his rattan ruler, and smacked the little fatty's buttocks. Who told you to slap the table and stand up for the third time? Who told you to so brazenly insult Teacher Jiang? This good-for-nothing, you're really angering me to death. It was a good lesson, but in the end, it ended with the little fatty fainting. As for the talisman that had originally been stuck to the little fatty's clothes, it fell to the ground as the time limit ended. It turned into two ordinary pieces of paper and didn't attract anyone's attention. Arbor bent down to pick it up and crumpled it into a ball. He had a new plan in his mind. Tonight, when I get home, I'll draw 8 or 10 of them. Chapter 38. The next day, our dear Xiaomu went to school with 2 panda eyes, and on the way, she couldn't help but nag. Yesterday, when she went back, she spent quite a bit of time just asking her second uncle's brother Xiaohu to buy talisman papers in town. After snatching the talisman brush from her apparition and chasing her away to cultivate her mystic sense, our dear Arbor didn't sleep for the entire night. She secretly drew talismans in the woodshed for the entire night, and out of a total of 30 talisman papers, 2/3 of them failed. In the end, Arbor drew 3 speed talismans, 3 strength talismans, and 4 repetition talismans. She felt that her life force for the entire day had already been exhausted in advance. Our dear Xiaomu sat at the back of the classroom with one hand supporting her chin, and her entire being was a little drowsy. At this time, a commotion came from the door, and 2 little lackeys called out, Young Master Tao. Only then did Arbor realize that the little tyrant, Zhou Tao, had arrived. After being tormented so miserably yesterday, he still dared to come today. His courage was commendable. Arbor moved her little hand to her forehead, slightly turned her head, and swept a glance at the little tyrant from the corner of her eyes. Then, she was slightly startled. The little tyrant's attire today. He wore a wide and plump sapphire blue silk robe, and a pair of black boots with wide soles. What was different from yesterday was that there was an extremely large coin-shaped jade tablet hanging in front of his chest, and the thick aura of a nouveau riche assaulted her senses. That round jade tablet hung heavily from his neck all the way to his abdomen, and the 3 large words, Protective Talisman, were written on it. It seemed like his nouveau riche father had spent a large sum of money to purchase this protective talisman. Speaking of which, in order to engrave complicated talisman characters on jade, not only did one need the support of profound energy, one also had to reach the level of a high-grade talisman master. According to her knowledge, in her previous life, there was only one person in the entire Seekong planet who could engrave talismans on jade. That person was from a talisman aristocratic family far away in Guanlan City. This little fatty's nouveau riche father was actually quite capable. However, when Arbor took a closer look, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but curve into a faint smile. She didn't feel the slightest bit of talisman energy from this washbasin-sized talisman. The crooked and messy fake talisman characters engraved on it were just broken characters that had been deliberately distorted so that she couldn't read them clearly. In other words, little Fatty's father might have spent a lot of money to buy a fake protective talisman. Since there was no talisman power attached to the jade, it was just an ornament. It couldn't even be compared to the lowest level of elementary talismans. TSK, he surprised her for no reason, but in the end, it was just a joke. Arbor curled his lips in boredom. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze suddenly paused and fell behind the fat boy. A Taoist priest held a peachwood sword that could ward off evil spirits and recited a string of words with conviction. Suddenly, the peachwood sword pointed in the direction of the black-faced teacher Jiang. He shouted loudly, "The 4 directions order demons and evil spirits to disperse. Evil spirits, submit quickly."
Ha ha.
The children roared with laughter and rolled into a ball. Swish, 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 swish. The Taoist priest's sword dance fell into Arbor's eyes, and she almost laughed her teeth out. This messy and disorderly sword dance was really hilarious. Zhou Tao's father had been tricked again. She didn't know where this fake Taoist priest had come from. "Little demon, quickly show yourself." The Taoist priest pinched a piece of talisman paper between his 2 fingers, and it fell into a bowl of clear water. This method of self-igniting without any wind immediately stunned the group of village children who had never seen the world. The Taoist priest opened his mouth and swallowed a mouthful of talisman water and sprayed it all on the peachwood sword. As he pretended to take a step forward, he suddenly felt that he had stepped on something. He immediately slipped and fell to the ground with a plop. The Taoist priest's eyes bulged. He didn't have time to protect himself and fell headfirst. With a bang, his nose was almost crooked. Chapter 39. This was like poking a hornet's nest. The entire classroom was filled with the sound of children's laughter. The Taoist priest stood up with a red face. He met the young master Zhou Tao's suspicious gaze and immediately shouted sternly. He pounced in teacher Zhang's direction. "Demon, where do you think you're going?" Swish, swish, swish. The Taoist priest rushed in front of teacher Jiang and played with the peachwood sword. He waved the sword up and down, and his body moved along with it. He looked like he was using all his strength, as if he was really fighting with an invisible demon. Teacher Jiang was so angry that his face turned red. He dodged the Taoist priest's peachwood sword left and right. He was about to scold the Taoist priest. Who would have thought that the Taoist priest would not be able to act cool for more than 3 seconds? He fell to the ground head first. This time, he was really dizzy from the fall. 2 streaks of blood appeared from his nostrils. The Taoist priest was anxious and angry. He roared and jumped up. The peachwood sword fell to the ground with a clatter. He immediately felt that something was wrong. His big head seemed to be attracted by the earth's core and heavily knocked down. This cycle repeated. The group of children looked at the Taoist priest's miserable appearance of standing up and falling down again and again. They all felt a little frightened. There was a shocking similarity in history. The group of students began to realize that the same unlucky thing kept repeating over and over again. Didn't this happen to little Fatty Zhou yesterday? Pong, pong, pong. After the Taoist priest fell again and again, his forehead was red. What was even more embarrassing was that his nose was bleeding, and it flowed all over his face. After a quarter of an hour, the miserable Taoist priest realized that his big head was finally no longer summoned by the earth's core. However, at that time, he had already been destroyed and lost his last bit of confidence. He stood up shakily. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were bulging. He looked quite scary. The Taoist priest suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream as he stumbled out of the school like a madman. The peachwood sword was thrown behind his butt, and he didn't care about it anymore. The little fatty was so scared that his face was a little pale. He tightly held the wash-basin-sized protective talisman on his chest and ran 2 steps after the Taoist priest. He panted and shouted, "Sorcerer, sorcerer, why are you running? Sorcerer, sorcerer, come back. Don't forget that you took 100 taels of silver from my father." Too fierce, too fierce. The ghosts here were too fierce. Little friend, you'd better run quickly. This poor Taoist will not earn that 100 taels of silver. The Taoist priest wailed and howled as he left, leaving behind a group of students looking at each other in dismay. Teacher Jiang was so angry that the veins on his forehead were popping out. For the past 2 days, little Fatty Zhou had turned the entire classroom upside down. How could he still be in the mood to teach? He waved his sleeves angrily and told the group of brats to scram. Arbor raised his hand and touched his nose. He had an idea. It was only 7 in the morning. Since the headmaster was not teaching, he might as well go up the mountain and look for the secret realm of Taoyuan. Arbor had already made plans beforehand, so when he went to school for the past 2 days, he brought with him a rope for climbing the mountain, a small shovel, a gourd to hold water, and other tools, so there was no need for him to go home. She dawdled until she was the last to leave the classroom. Seeing that there was no one around, she went around the back of the classroom to a small path overgrown with withered grass and ran up nimbly. This small path was more steep and desolate than the mountain path she had taken to bring the Tiandao sect. She had never walked this path in her previous life, so she really did not know where it led to Hullen Mountain. Arbor raised her head slightly and squinted at the withered forest that was gradually melting into the sunlight. Chapter 40. This Hullen Mountain encompassed the entire Quoto village, so its range was relatively large. Arbor only vaguely remembered that the paradise that was discovered in her previous life was deep in the east of the mountain. However, she still needed to slowly explore the specific location. However, what she lacked the most now was time, not to mention that she was alone. If she wanted to search the mountain, it would be too unrealistic. Arbor sighed softly. The treasured secret realms could only be found by fate. It was up to the will of the heavens to find them. Half an hour later, a nimble little figure quickly flitted through the forest overgrown with withered trees, occasionally stopping to look back. Suddenly, Arbor paused, and her figure shrank back behind a withered tree. Holding her breath for a few seconds, Arbor gently poked her little head out, and her gaze fell on a small open space not far away. Looking from her direction, she could see 5 burly men in green sitting around the small open space that had turned into sand. Their physiques were very strong, and one of their arms was as thick as several of Qiao Mu's thighs. Their breathing was very slow, and they didn't look like ordinary people at first glance. This Hullen Mountain had been abandoned for so many years, and there were fewer and fewer living creatures in the mountain. Usually, no one would go up the mountain. Therefore, it was very strange for these people to inexplicably appear here. Arbor carefully hid behind a tree and observed for a while. Then, she saw one of the burly men stand up with a bamboo tube filled with water and take a few steps forward. Huh. The burly man let out a low command and handed the bamboo tube to the person tied to the tree. That person was thin and tall, and his purple robe was loosely wrapped around his body. A white jade satin belt was tied around his waist, and his head was tilted as he leaned against the tree trunk. His pitch-black silk-like hair was rippling with water as it softly draped over his shoulders, completely covering his face. The burly man's voice didn't arouse the slightest reaction from that person. He even moved his head to the side in disgust and didn't approach the bamboo tube at all. A pair of red silk peony shoes gently landed on the sand, accompanied by a strong fragrance. Arbor hurriedly reached out to cover her nose and mouth, almost sneezing from that fragrant and stinky smell. Duan Lang. Arbor's little body trembled slightly. God, why did this woman's voice sound like a chicken being strangled? It was so shrill that it almost pierced her eardrums. Duan Lang, you haven't drunk a mouthful of water for 2 days. If this goes on, how can your body hold on? Come, I'll feed you 2 sips. The woman continued to speak in a soft and delicate voice. She walked forward and was about to reach out and lift the man's chin. Pooh. The man tied to the tree suddenly raised his chin slightly and opened his mouth slightly as he avoided the woman's fingers. At the same time, the woman hurriedly pulled over a burly man beside her and placed him in front of her. Ugh! The brawny man let out a muffled groan. His sturdy body slid to the ground and fell to the ground with a thud. Arbor took a closer look and saw that there was a long and thin nail in the man's throat. It was completely dyed red by the blood on his neck. The woman hatefully stomped her feet and called out sweetly, "Duan Lang, why are you so ruthless?" The other 4 brawny men who were sitting and eating dry rations saw the death of their companion. Their fingers slightly tightened as they grabbed the dry rations bag in their hands. They constantly rejoiced in their hearts. Fortunately, they didn't go forward just now. This dangerous person really couldn't get too close. Previously, they had more than a dozen brothers, and more than half of them had died in the hands of this hidden weapon. It could be seen how cruel this person was. If it wasn't for the special medicine that restrained him and made him only act up in a short distance, they would have all died by now. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.